I was committing assaults on other inmates. As far as the general public is concerned, it's a victimless crime because because they figure that it's one piece of crap committing a crime on another piece of crap. Because they're citizens. Sure. They're human beings. Mm-hmm. And they have rights, and they have rights that are to be free of assault and assault with a deadly weapon. Sure. And an attempted murder. And hey, I'm supposed to be protected. I'm in here. I'm in prison. Doesn't mean that I could just be a pincushion for somebody. Well, I was kind of housing insecure, I should say. I wasn't homeless, but technically I was. By definition, I was. But but I had a home. I could always go home to my family if I wanted to. This was something that's funny with me and my family. Is I would be like, oh yeah, see that over there? That's a cool place. You could sleep over there. You could build a little encampment over there. Mm-hmm. And my parents were so put off by that. But I was just like, yeah, you know what? This whole world is just a place to live. And you don't have to live in a house or be part of society in the way that you guys are. And I was also humbled, in prison. I was made to, come to terms with, with who I was as a person and as a man, intellectually and emotionally, as well as, spiritually. I identified, a lot of weaknesses within myself, and I worked to either come to terms with those or to grow stronger in those areas.
Thank you so much for finding your way to another episode of the podcast that solves all of life's problems, the Why Can't We Talk About That podcast. Before getting to today's episode, I want to remind you that I love hearing from you, so please shoot me an email and tell me hi. You can do that through Why Can't We Talk About That at proton.me. That's also the email you would use to let me know that you, or someone you know, is interested in coming on the show and having a life-changing conversation with me. Finally, please leave a review of this podcast from wherever you are listening from, simply because it will help me out in some way that I don't exactly understand, but am told is true nonetheless. Now on to today's episode. My guest this week is Doug Hoover, a married, artistic type of guy and cat dad who has found happiness within his working class routine. Doug was recommended to me by a lifelong friend of mine, and I have to admit, when my friend told me that Doug had spent over 20 years in prison, I had some concerns with inviting him into my house. All of that faded away pretty quickly, though, as soon as I started to talk with him. I quickly learned that Doug is a changed man and a good dude. In fact, after talking with him, I would have never have guessed that he spent that much time in jail. I really enjoyed getting to know Doug, and I hope that you will too. One final thing. By the time this episode is out, we will most likely know the outcome of the election. But as I am recording it right now, we do not, as it is currently 11:37 a.m. on Tuesday, November 5th. All I'm going to say is that whether or not your candidate won or lost, and regardless of which side of the political fence you fall on, please treat everyone with love and respect. Enjoy the conversation.
I think orange cats have that reputation.
I've heard that. I had never heard that until we got him, and people come over and I would say that and they go, oh yeah, orange cats. I'm like, really?
Well, I just got I rescued a calico recently, and they have that same genetic profile as an orange cat.
Oh, okay.
And so I think that although she's female and she's and just recently spayed, she's still got a lot of energy, a lot of zeal and kind of lust for life, is climbing things, investigating everything, jumping around, terrorizing the other cat. Immediately came in and dominated the other cat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Despite the size difference, and she's just a baby.
Yeah.
Just a baby. The other cat, had been there, had probably demarcated all of the space for itself.
Oh, boy.
And then this new, had lived under the tyranny of an older black cat for a while, and so was used to hiding. And then after the black cat passed, it had enjoyed some freedom and the independence of having the ability to just roam the whole house. And then we brought this cat home and upset everything. And now the new cat has dominated the older cat. And the older cat is just a tabby, a gray tabby named Cinder. And she, both female cats, but she's just, content to let the younger cat, run around and
doesn't seem to mind
eat first and, displace her everywhere she goes. The young cat, my older cat will get comfortable, try to rest somewhere, and then here comes the young cat. Hey, I want to be there.
Yeah.
And then, you're over on the windowsill. I want to be there. You're going to use the restroom. No peace at all for this cat. I'm going to go into the litter box and displace you out of it. I can't be.
That's
can't
funny,
even use
man.
the restroom.
Yeah. Wow.
So it really is difficult. And I feel for the other cat, and I try to make sure that she.
And how long have you had the new one?
Just 6 months now.
Oh, okay. Pretty new. That's about as long as we've had that little guy too.
Only recently spayed. In fact, we just babied her through that whole recovery process.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. It's the first time I've had a pet that I've nurtured from that very young age.
Right.
Yeah. And I got a strong attachment to this cat. And
so you're a cat person, I can tell. Have you always been?
I never knew that.
You
would
be.
Okay.
It's a recent cat thing for you.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, my wife had cats. And I became a cat person, through relational intimacy. Living together. We just, she brought the cats with her. Okay. And I never knew that I would be a cat person. I never knew really that I would have a strong attachment for any pet. Right. Because I didn't have pets growing up.
Not even like dogs or nothing.
I spent my whole life in prison where you don't have pets. I
Yeah.
mean, you might have a bird or an occasional lizard or something like that
really?
that you can, somehow capture or bring in from outside. Yeah.
Really? Interesting.
Some people have spiders,
Really?
It's really weird.
That's crazy.
Maybe because a lot of these prisons are in fairly desolate areas,
right.
Like deserts mostly. So you get some spiders, some pretty good sized spiders and tarantulas and, brown recluses and things that are, pretty hardy and, difficult to kill, even though, it's hard. I mean, I can't imagine trying to, care for a spider in the ways that they need to be cared for. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
I wouldn't either.
How do you feed them? What do you give them?
Usually people just smash them.
People just try, trial and error. Like, does it like this? Does it like that? Yeah. Now you got to bring bugs in. And it's the same thing for a bird, kind of. Although one of the birds that was kept as a pet close to me, just flew and went out and did its feeding, and it would come back. It would come back. So it was
crazy.
really a bizarre thing, and
it liked you,
and very cool. Well, it wasn't mine.
Oh, okay.
But one of the neighboring inmates had it, and then I did have a bird in my cell, but it was my cellie's bird, and and I didn't care much for it. I mean, I probably could have grown to to care for it, but it wasn't my bird, and it was really just kind of an inconvenience at that time because I didn't sign up for having a bird,
right.
and then all of the the bird it's like dropping on all of your personal property,
that's
making
terrible.
a mess in the cell, and the cells are hard enough to keep clean.
Right.
It's just a small space, 2 people. Yeah. Very difficult to maintain a level of cleanliness and hygiene, and there's dust and and just detritus from like living,
right.
Yeah. So anyways,
well, I'm sure we'll talk some about your prison stuff. It sounds like it's a pretty big part of your life. So we'll just kind of jump in. I like to kind of ask about you a little bit. I mean, it doesn't have to be real in depth at this point, just kind of in a nutshell, because I don't really know anything about you. I know we have a mutual friend, Jimmy, who's awesome. I've known Jimmy forever, since like first grade, I think is how far back I go with him. He speaks very highly of you. He says, you're one of his favorite people. He thinks you're awesome. So that's enough for me.
Yeah, he's great too. I mean, how often do you? I mean, and maybe it is something common in your life, but it seems increasingly uncommon nowadays to have a friend, a childhood acquaintance who you've stayed in contact with, or lived in proximity to for all of that time.
For sure.
And you grew up together, maybe on the other side of the fence from one another.
Yeah.
And then had all of your adventures and mischief and growing and developmental experiences with one another. That's a very strong bond. And I'm to be honest, I envy people that have friends like that.
Right.
Because I think it's something very significant and developmentally important, but also rare. I think it truly is a treasure, and people growing up nowadays with just the different kinds of lifestyles that people live, and the fact that people move a lot more, or people come into and out of relationships a lot more fluid than they used to. Right. There is a kind of social fluidity that doesn't that didn't exist before, where you might be friends with somebody but then you're not, and
which is true most of the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's for most people. You kind of grow apart, and I think with Jimmy and I, it's not like we were close friends from first grade on. I mean, we had years and years where we didn't talk at all.
Oh yeah.
He moved to Arizona for a while, then he came back. And we lost touch for many years. But we try to get together every once in a while, have lunch or whatever. And
that's cool.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of neat, when you have a friend that you've known for that long. Yeah. It's just it is. Like you said, it's kind of unheard of.
It is unheard of,
yeah.
And yet I ran into people that I haven't seen for years, and either one or the other recognizes the other person.
Yeah.
I think I look fairly similar to what I did when I was younger.
Okay.
What the funny thing is that, like, if you were to see me from a distance, I have a very distinct way of walking.
Oh, okay.
Kind of on my bounce on my the front of my feet, my balls of my feet a little bit, and I used to probably be made fun of for that, or but it's a signature style of walking.
Yeah, sure.
And people would see me from afar. Oh man, there's Doug. I could tell by his goofy walk or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was at the beach, and I wasn't looking to meet anybody or see anybody from my past, but people recognized me, and it was probably because of the way that I walked or carried myself. Oh man, are you Dougie? I'm Tony. I'm so and so. I'm
funny.
Mark, and we went to school together. And so this guy's camping over here. You won't believe it. And so I've had some pretty uplifting encounters, where I've run into people that I knew when I was young, because I was born and raised in Lompoc.
Oh, okay.
I was born and raised in Lompoc, but I left, and I went off and explored the world.
Oh, really?
Very different. Well, I say that generally. I never left the United States except for Mexico.
But explored the country.
But I explored the world in a sense. Like I got out of my Lompoc. Yeah. And I got out of my comfort zone.
Right.
So that I wanted to
About how old were you when that happened?
See if there was more to life than than what I was experiencing.
Right.
And I would say, as early as 13,
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I left home early to get out of the situation.
Like
I was
left
in.
your home life, like literally your parents and all
Yeah,
that?
I would run away.
Okay.
I would run away, and then and I would come back. If my parents were great about allowing me the security and the knowledge of having a place within their home, if I followed their rules, and that was where we came to a place where I wasn't willing to do that, or I was incapable of doing that, or as a young person I wasn't on the same page as them, like in terms of what I wanted out of life and how I wanted to live my life. it was the early '80s, and there was a lot going on for a young person, and I would, I partied a lot.
Right.
I used drugs. I drank. I would go to shows. I would leave town and not come home for days on end, and terrify my folks with with the thought that maybe something had happened to me, because I was so horrible about communicating and being responsible to check in with them, and things that kids nowadays would never consider doing.
Well, that was before the days of cell phones too, so it wasn't like they could just call you wherever you were.
That's exactly right. And it wasn't my habit to check in with them necessarily. I mean, I was a latchkey kid. My parents both worked very hard.
Okay.
My sister and I were alone and on our own for the majority of our childhood.
Okay.
And my dad was. Both my parents, first of all, were great parents. They supported us and provided for us and met all of our physical and emotional needs. I think that's fair to say. Definitely the physical needs.
Sure.
I had housing, I had clothing, I had food.
It was just you and your sister. You had just the one sibling.
I do. I have, and she's a year younger than me.
Okay.
And a year and a month.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1970.
70. Okay.
Yeah, December 19th, 1970.
Okay.
I'm going to be 54.
Okay.
Next month, and so at that time when I was developing and as a teenager, man, I was angsty and I was into drugs, and that didn't help the situation at all.
Never does.
And I had disagreements with my parents
Sure.
about what my, what I wanted to do with my life, and to be honest, I didn't know. I knew I didn't want to, conform to their idea of what life should be for me. I saw my dad struggle with, and how difficult it was, for him, to be a man, to work as hard as he did, to provide for his family. Honestly, I was probably, afraid of committing to that at that age. I mean, I and understandably so. I mean, I don't think, teenagers in general are thinking about settling down and starting a family and taking on all the responsibilities of that. No. But I especially felt like unequal to the task. Had a lot of respect for my dad, but I had very little respect for myself in terms of what I was capable of doing.
Sure.
And I grew up fairly easy, I think. I mentioned it being provided for and not having a lot of needs outside of of just existing and going to school and everything. I wasn't challenged as a young person, in the ways that some people are by poverty or a lack of care or supervision.
So can you remember then, like if you say you came from a good family, can you remember like what made you want to rebel, like specifically? Was it just was it just normal teenage kind of wanting to go your own way kind of thing?
That's one of the mysteries of growing up. I think that, because empirically there's nothing wrong with the quality of my parents' life. I mean, everybody works and everybody has demands on their time and limited resources of time and money, and there's challenges that people face, and especially young married people who are bringing up children. It's difficult in any economy and at any time throughout history. I'm sure that's a standard thing.
Sure.
But at the same time, I might have disagreed with their worldview. Like maybe that I thought it was somewhat limited. Okay. I was imaginative and somewhat, discontented with the idea of living there. I think that instead of going to work, and I had a paper route, and
nice.
And I did a few things, to earn money, but I also stole, and and I did things that people, wouldn't condone. My parents were ashamed of it, ashamed of a lot of my behavior.
Sure.
I would go to a friend's house and I would sponge off of them, and I'd eat the food out of their refrigerator, and,
Right.
and I would be, asked not to come back.
Right.
And there was a lot of instances like that where, my parents were upstanding people and proud people, and they were kind of embarrassed by me,
Right.
and because of that, I felt like maybe I wasn't accepted in my own home.
Yeah.
And
Was your sister similar to you, or in that way, or no? Was she kind of on the straight and narrow
she
more?
She was very square,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
in that way. And she's a very, she's a really good girl. I'm proud of her for the fact that she's never gotten into any trouble.
Wow.
She came from the same place as me, but she turned out very differently.
Sure.
She and she had a more difficult time developmentally than I did. Because she had some learning disabilities. And she had other things that challenged her, and whereas everything kind of came easy to me. And I felt like I had every advantage, and I should have excelled and did well, but I squandered those opportunities and the privileges that I had, and I didn't make much of myself, growing up, and I internalized that, and I felt like, well, maybe there's something wrong with me, and my parents were probably in agreement with that.
Sure.
Like they've struggled with the parenting style.
Sure.
Like how are we going to deal with this kid?
Right.
Like he's a handful. He doesn't want to follow the rules. He's he doesn't agree with our worldview and how we want to raise him. And back then, people used to still get spankings and stuff, and there was, and corporal punishment was a real thing, and it got to the point where, the spankings weren't working anymore. I was getting older, and it was frustrating to them, and, everybody just felt like emotionally taxed, and it kind of running out of the capacity to be of service to one another. That's the thing, is they just kind of threw in the towel, and I recognized that they were coming to that place, and I was just like, maybe it's for the best, that I leave,
right.
And then and maybe I didn't view it in those same terms then, like I don't know if I had an awareness of that that's the point in our relationship that we came to, but retrospectively I look back on it and I go, oh yeah, that's what happened. So we just kind of mutually agreed that it was best that, like, first of all, I got these people in tears. They're losing control of themselves, like in terms of the punishments. Like maybe going too far. Because they're. They just lost their mind, with the fact that, like, you're going to listen to me. You're going to do, what, I can't do anything else. And so I just, I think that spiritually and probably on, cognitively on a level or another, I just decided that, I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out. And that was it. And that was kind of the suggestion too. Like, look, if you don't like living here under these rules and you're not going to get on board with our program, then maybe it's for the best that you go out and see for yourself what the world's like, and
Now-
then you'll probably get an idea that it's
Right.
not so bad here.
Yeah.
And they were right about that.
I was going to ask you, like, in hindsight, do you think that was good for you in the long run?
Oh, I think
even though you went
developmentally-
through all that you went through, but like where you stand today, do you think a lot of that was beneficial for your growth?
I think it was instrumental, and it, I think that the trajectory that I was on, the kind of life that I was living, the person that I was, like the essence of the person that I was, demanded, to be released into the world, for better or worse.
Right.
And, I had to be, become aware of what was out there. When you're living in a sheltered situation, you have your needs met and you're unhappy, or you have a spiritual unrest. I think the only thing you can do really is to get outside of that situation, get a different perspective on life. Sometimes you do that through meeting hardship or facing challenges, possibly coming up against immovable, objects and things that are, stronger and more willful than yourself.
Right.
And
Right.
they kind of check you and balance you and regulate you,
Yes.
Emotionally, so that you kind of gain a greater perspective
For sure.
on life. And
Yeah, you almost have to go through that.
you
in
have to
order
go through it,
yeah.
and there's different manifestations of that, or different ways that happens.
Sure. Sure.
For me, it happened in stages. I think that going out into the world and having experiences and reinforce the idea that I was capable of taking care of myself. At least initially, I felt that it was me,
Sure.
taking care of myself, that my intellect, my physical prowess, my the fact that I was situationally aware and could perceive things in the world and utilize resources that were at my disposal to live,
Right.
And whether that was like finding shelter or finding food or having developing certain social skills to either to relationally integrate myself in the community or in the worst case scenario to manipulate another person into giving me what I needed to live.
Right.
There was a certain amount of altruism, but there was also a certain amount of deceptiveness, or deceit in the practice of survival. I did some bad things too, to live.
Sure.
It took an easy way out in a lot of circumstances where, okay, well, what is the fastest and most expedient way to get the things that I need?
Yeah.
And so I committed crimes, or I would take advantage of people's generosity, or I did a lot of shoplifting, for example. I mean and yet I never really faced any consequences for that. I shouldn't say I never did, because I eventually did. I went to prison for many years.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that I got away with a lot of things, and it kind of it allowed me to have this false sense of myself and my abilities.
Like you feel like you couldn't get caught, like you were untouchable.
Yeah, well, not that maybe that I didn't ever believe that I couldn't get caught, or that I was untouchable, or that I was smarter than everybody else, but deluded into just, I don't know. I felt a sense that that nothing bad was going to happen to me.
Oh, okay.
You know, and that was the
Yeah.
thing about leaving home. It's like, look, you guys are concerned about me. I'm not concerned about myself. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to live, and I'm going to be just fine. And that was true for a while.
Okay.
You know, and I think that the part of that is because we live in a cool place.
Yeah.
We live in a cool place where, you know, back then people, you know, were generally safe. You
Sure,
know, you could
sure.
be out at night. You could go to parties. You could, you know, I used to go down to Isla Vista all the time, and I would just crash on people's pads. I would couches, you
Sure,
know,
sure.
at their pads. I would live on college campuses and just, you know, like pretend that I was part of the scene,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
and nobody really bothered me. You know, I would skateboard and surf and people, you know, make friends, and it was very relaxed atmosphere. And I think that, you know, as growing up, you know, I was emboldened, you know, and I felt I felt a certain amount of courage,
Right,
you know,
right.
And granted, part of that is the result of that privileged upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I do feel like, and I'm using privilege intentionally because I do feel like I enjoyed a certain amount of white privilege.
Okay.
You know, that because I was white and because I was male, because I came from a solid lower middle class upbringing, that I projected a certain air of belonging and so I think that I was tolerated and allowed and encouraged to, you know, to do the things that I was doing, you know, by the establishment in a lot of ways, because they were looking at elsewhere for problems, for threats, you know, and the things that I was doing weren't terribly alarming at that age. And, you know, it was just, you know, I think that I got a pass on a lot of things, you know, whereas I think that possibly you know, nowadays, or maybe not nowadays so much, but I think that if I was anybody else, if I was a person of color, for example, I think that I would have been introduced to the system a lot sooner than I was.
Okay.
And
about how old were you? Well, so I guess my first question is, when you mentioned prison, were you like in and out of prison, or were you in like for a long time?
I was pretty much in. So I mean, I did commit some crimes. Okay. And I was arrested, you know, for those crimes. However, the way that the system chose to deal with me, because it was, you know, there was maybe a first or second offense, there was an amount of leniency, and there was also you know, consideration for that, you know, that privilege. That hey, look, your parents have come to court for you. They say you're not a bad kid, that you just went off and you did this. So it's basically, you know, they kind of bailed me out of a situation because of their credibility, the people who they were in society, even though they you know, they weren't, you know, anybody of note,
right?
Per
but
se.
The fact they showed up for you,
they showed up,
shows that maybe if they sent you home, you might be able to rehabilitate just within your family structure, as opposed to needing solid jail time.
That's right.
To where it's, if it's a kid that their parents don't care about him, like, oh, whatever, I don't care about him. Yeah. And then I'd be like, okay, this kid, sending him home is not going to do him any good.
That's right. Know? Yeah, because I mean, there's an obvious problem.
Sure.
And yeah, my parents might have spoke up and said, hey, look, if you know, first of all, we're willing to help him, you know, pay for any damages, or you know, I forget, there's words that the legal system uses to
like retribution.
Retribution might be one of them, but you know, basically, you know, everybody's going to be taken care of. You know, people are going to be paid back. The damages will be you know, repaired, or you know, stolen merchandise will be replaced, whatever. You know, things will be made right, and we're going to take him home, and we're going to deal with that, you know.
Yeah.
But and that might have happened initially, like as a young person.
Sure.
I stole from my neighbor. You know, I broke into my neighbor's houses. I stole from my neighbor. Mm-hmm. I had one cool neighbor who saw what I was, you know, what I was going through, saw the person that I was becoming, recognized the problem, and had a really unique and creative solution to, you know, to the problem of theft and, you know, this kind of sneak thievery. You know, I burgled his boat. You know, like he had a boat, and I climbed under the tarp of his boat, rifled through his toolboxes. I stole some, you know, fishing tackle, lure, you know, petty crime.
Sure.
But not a victimless crime. I mean, it's personal property. I violated the sanctity of
he paid for all that stuff, right?
It's his stuff, dude.
Right.
It's his stuff. He worked hard for it.
Right.
You know, that was the mentality, and yet he showed me favor and it said, "Hey, look, man. Don't be stealing my stuff. You know, what's really going on here? Do you want to go fishing? Is that what the deal is? You got an interest in fishing? Mm-hmm. I obviously fish. I got a boat. I got all this equipment. You know, let's figure this out. You know, like if you want to go fishing, you know, I'll take you fishing."
Did you go with him?
I did go fishing. Nice. With him. I did go fishing with him, and that was awesome.
Yeah.
And it brings me to tears almost every time I recount that, because it was a really, you know. And again, this isn't a knock against my parents or anything, because they were great parents, but you know, it was a different approach to, you know, to the behavioral issues that I was having, and it resonated with me, struck me really as, and so he says, "Hey, let's go fishing." I went fishing with him. We had a great time. We caught a great bass out here at Kachuma.
Nice.
And then each step of the way there was something informative and imprinting about the experience. So not only did he show me grace and he gave me opportunity to you know, to give him his stuff back, and then also to kind of equip me to fish. Right. But he took me out. I had a great experience. We got a good fish. He also is the type of fisherman who does the taxidermy himself. You know?
Nice.
So like he dried this fish out. He mounted the fish. He painted all the scales on the fish, or you know, whatever the process is. The glass eyes, all of that stuff.
I can't imagine what goes into that.
He did all the work, and he was into it, and I would help him. And then, you know, I'm using the router and learning how to use these tools to, you know, to make a plaque for it. And then, you know, let's get this engraved down here at the trophy shop. We'll put this thing on there. You know, 8 pounds, whatever. You know, this and.
About how old are you when you did this with him?
It would have been probably, you know, the same thing, 13, 14.
13 or 14, okay.
Yeah, it was.
Are you still in touch with this guy at all?
Oh, yeah. He's still, well, that's the cool thing about it. Yeah. And this is what's great about Lompoc and probably neighboring communities like this here.
Sure.
Is, you know, people are still there. You know, the same people that were there when you grew up are still there now in a lot of cases. Yeah. And so this guy lived right across the street from us. My dad's still in the house that I grew up in. Okay. And my neighbor's still right across the street from him. And, you know, after that, so 13, 14, we do that. We go fishing. I have this thing with them. I make a plaque. And then because of the skill that I've learned with this woodworking, now he's like, "Hey, check this out. I need a new sign for my house. This, you know, has my family name on it. Okay. You know, let's engrave a plaque for, you know, like, well, so what you do is you use, you know, you kind of like draw it out, and then you kind of carve away, you know, relieve the wood around the letters to kind of make it, you know, this kind of carved structure.
Is it like wood burning, or is it more like carving?
I think it's wood carving just like a bas relief or something, like where you're only removing a little bit of the material, and then the rest of it is kind of stands up.
So like 3Ds kind of out.
It just stands up and out a little bit, so you can paint it and stain it, and there's a contrast, and then there's maybe a border. It was pretty cool, but he helped me do that, and we did one for his name. Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. He's a great guy. Later on, he used to manage the Williams brothers. And
Williams Brothers is a name I haven't heard.
Yeah, he managed the Williams Brothers. Became Vaughn's, obviously, and then
in Lompoc.
In Lompoc,
okay.
And the Williams Brothers, he managed it, and he hired me on when I was legal age to work.
Oh.
I mean, back then I think you could start work before you were 16, but maybe like in some small.
If you had like a work permit.
A work permit. So like he got me on board with the Williams Brothers.
Doing bagging groceries?
I was bagging groceries. Okay. People used to do that.
Yeah.
They used to bam, bam.
Yeah,
and I was good at it.
There was an art form.
It was an art form. And the paper bags, and you would just, open them up real fast, throw the groceries in there in a certain way to keep the heavy stuff on the bottom. And, there was structure to it. And, you had to have hand-eye coordination because it's almost like you're juggling. You throw the thing up, drop it into the bottom, catch it, softly at the bottom, and then just lay it in there. And then go as far as to if the customer wanted, like pushing out the cart, loading their car up.
Sure.
Things that don't happen anymore. That kind of level of customer service doesn't happen anymore, really. But I was good at it, and I enjoyed it, and I felt like I felt like
That's some
I
pride.
felt pretty good about that. I felt pretty good about that because I was legit.
Sure.
I had a job. And not to mention having a job, but I was performing the job well. But also I had a limited and amount of social interaction with people outside of my family.
Okay.
Adults.
Sure.
And they were and generally positive interactions with adults because I was doing a good job.
Sure.
And so they had good things to say, and that made me feel good about myself. Better, I should say, about myself. Not great because I still messed up kid, but I started to see that there's maybe you can get out of whatever this thing is you're in and do this. And so I did that for a while, and I worked there, and I thought about maybe going to work, as I got older, and I was still kind of partying and conflicted about that, and I was having issues at school, maybe going to drop out of school.
Okay. It was high school at that point?
Yeah, it was high school.
Okay.
And my high school was cool, but it was
that Cabrillo?
It was Lompoc.
Okay.
It was Lompoc High, and it was kind of a party school. A lot of people, partied there, and there was a lot of drugs there, but there was great athletic programs too.
Did you play sports?
I didn't.
Okay.
I could have. I did all the sports growing up. Pop Warner. I played Little League baseball. I wrestled for the boys club.
Oh, cool.
And I did. My freshman year, I did think that I was going to wrestle. Because I was pretty good at wrestling.
Yeah.
Like that was the thing with the boys club. We did some wrestling tournaments. I had limited degrees and varying degrees of success within my weight class, and I thought, well, maybe I'll wrestle in high school because I wanted to belong to something. I wanted to be a part of something. Because I to an extent, I was still a loner. That was my thing. I was a loner. I was into the punk rock scene. I was into drugs, and so I thought sports were lame. And I didn't want to conform to anything.
Yeah, the punks and the jocks were kind of at odds.
Yeah, we were
definitely
at odds. But wrestling seemed to bridge that gap a little bit because you could be. It was it wasn't a team sport necessarily. You were part of the wrestling team, but you're out there on your own. And you could work through some of the aggression that you had.
Oh yeah, but it's a good outlet.
But you could also, be dominated by somebody else, and then and come out of that feeling like, it wasn't the end of the world. Yeah, I lost, but it was okay. And I think that kind of experience is also helpful. Yeah, is that you realize that no matter how bad something is in that moment, if you're able to survive it and, psychologically and physically recover from it, how do you reconcile that experience and move forward? Yeah. Those are things developmentally that are important.
Of course.
And but I didn't give myself time to do any of that. I faced some challenges, not only with the regimented training, the program, but, with my attendance at school, and I knew the coach also was my neighbor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And and so I ended up flaking out on it.
Okay.
I ended up dropping out and bailing on the wrestling and
Dropping out of school or dropping out of
I
wrestling?
dropped out of wrestling first, and then
Okay.
I dropped out of school.
Okay.
And I did eventually, continue in school, and I graduated. But I went to
Like a continuation.
continuation
Okay.
school. I went. They had some. At first, I tried with some independent study classes because I was, I guess, smart enough to qualify for independent study, but. It wasn't a thing back then like it is now where, you have a whole curriculum that you could do on your own. It was just a few classes. You had like an independent study science class or an independent study art class. And that's not enough credits to graduate. You could do something. I did something. I worked within the science department, and I explored, some of my, interests in science. And I was pretty good at science.
So,
and
like,
math.
what kind of science stuff were you into back then? Like,
Oh gosh, well, physics mostly.
Okay.
Yeah, physics. I wasn't great at math. And the physics was a problem because it's so math based.
Right. Yeah.
But I understood the physical phenomenon.
Sure.
And I understood the laws of physics, and I could, Newtonian physics I could grasp, and I could do most of the math for that.
Okay.
But then you get into some of the more difficult equations, and they involve calculus, and I hadn't taken trigonometry, and I hadn't taken analytical geometry.
See, all those words you're saying are kind of scary to me. Just you're saying them, and I'm going, wah!
Yeah, they're
like math to me is like, wah!
They were scary to me too, and that's part of the reason why I didn't pursue my education further at that point, because I did come up against that wall.
Sure.
And it was scary to me, and to be honest, a lot of the things that scare me and a lot of the things that I'm afraid that I might fail at, I just opt out of.
Okay.
I opt out of. I protect myself from the idea that I might try something and fail. I want to be successful at the things that I do.
Sure.
And so I just do the easy things.
Okay.
And
do you feel like you're still that way today?
In some ways, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm trying not to be.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is because these kinds of situations would have been difficult for me in the past.
You mean like having this conversation? You mean, or
I think that having an open conversation, and disclosing things about myself,
especially with somebody you don't even know,
somebody that I don't even know, that's
sure. Sure.
So this was something that I felt like, okay, this is great. This is a good opportunity for you to have an interesting exchange with somebody, and to make a social connection with a person who you formerly didn't know, and and just to say yes to something. And to kind of embody the spirit of yes, and I think that my experience, in life and particularly in prison, has helped give me the courage to do that.
Okay.
Because I was faced with a lot of scary things in prison.
Sure, I bet.
And I did them. I made it through that.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great experience for me.
Okay.
And I was also humbled.
Sure.
In prison.
Yeah.
I was made to come to terms with with who I was as a person and as a man, intellectually and emotionally, as well as spiritually.
Sure.
I identified a lot of weaknesses within myself, and I worked to come to terms with those, or to maybe grow stronger in those areas.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And
so how long have you been out?
I've been out for just over 2 years now.
2
I got
years,
out
okay.
in March 17th of 2022.
Okay.
I was in prison for over 25 years.
Okay.
Closer to like maybe 27 years. So,
okay. Wow.
And to be honest, I wasn't even supposed to be out yet.
Oh, wow.
I was supposed to be in prison until 2029.
So good behavior got out? Or?
Yeah, partly good behavior, partly changes within the legal system where they restructured things.
Okay.
Prison overcrowding has always been a problem.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say it's always been a problem, but it's since the the early '90s, it's been a problem because they made it. They passed a lot of legislation that criminalized a lot of things and kept people in prison for a lot longer than they do now. Like there's stuff like mandatory minimums, for drug convictions and this 3 strikes law. If you're a habitual criminal, even if it's just something relatively minor, petty theft, you could potentially, end up in prison for life because of that, and so, and that sounds, to some people, that sounds like a good solution to the problem of crime.
Not to me.
But at the same time, you have to have the infrastructure and the ability to accommodate that upswell and that surge in the population of incarcerated persons.
Right.
And initially it was great for business. It was great for the economy. They were building a lot of new prisons. They were putting to work a lot of people, both free people and correctional custody staff.
Okay.
And so, the communities that would otherwise not have a lot of industry, suddenly started to boom. Those largely unpopulated areas out in the desert that I mentioned earlier. And they're famous now for the prisons that they have: Centinela, Calipatria, Delano. They're there's the places like out in Kalinga. They're places in the middle of nowhere that that would otherwise not have much industry. They had a prison, and in some cases multiple prisons where they had a minimum facility, they had a maximum security facility, and they employed a couple thousand people.
Do you think a big part of that is because people generally like real estate and that kind of thing isn't real high when it's near a prison, right? So you think there's a reason why they put prisons in remote areas, not in residential as much, or even near bigger cities? Because who wants to live? I mean, even in Lompoc, it's in Lompoc, but it's not really in Lompoc, right? It's out, in the middle of nowhere.
That's true. That's true, and it is kind of a chicken and egg situation. The reason that they build prisons in unpopulated areas is, one, it's unpopulated and the real estate is probably cheap.
Right.
Somebody's got to purchase the real estate, the property, be granted the land or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no demolition to be done per se. They don't have to clear a space. I mean, it's a new construction site. In a lot of cases, it's just ground. You just got to level the ground and use heavy equipment to tilt up these huge cement slabs, and they're prefabricated, buildings. They go up really quickly.
I bet,
they're just, a foot of steel reinforced concrete. And it's amazing how, they just kind of go up and then their floors are added. And, and then some construction firm comes in and does the plumbing and the electrical, and it all happens really quickly, relatively quickly once it's approved. But so there's nothing there. They get the land for cheap. They build a prison for cheap, and then then you start this kind of neighboring community, and the people that want to live there, the people that are in, support services for the prison. There's going to be some small business. There's going to be some housing for the staff.
Sure.
There'll probably be some kind of trucking outfit. There's going to be a small community that builds up out of that, just like they did in the old days, the old West. You're going to have a general. You're going to have a mine or some kind of industry, and then you're going to have a bunch of stores around there, people that are going to make money off of that institution, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And in this place, they were just kind of you know, instead of cattle, they were ranching and farming, you know, like human beings. And,
Right.
And so that's the thing is that so now, but a lot of those towns, you know, over time that just becomes their thing, and like I said, they're famous for it. And the bizarre thing is culturally within those towns, that people have very strong views about the prison.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yep.
Most of their family members work there. You know, so they feel like, you know, the prison is great because it provides a source of income, but also the people within the prison are, you know, are somewhat less than human, and you know, they're different from us, and
Right.
you know, they're just a means to, you know, like, you know, that was the feeling that I got generally, is like, is, you know, people. It's easier for people to come to work and to feel like that the people that they're you know, managing, you know, the resources that they're managing are less than human. And then you can kind of come and go and treat them dismissively and be a bit of a, you know, interpersonally, you know, detached from them, and so and rightly so. I mean, if you have an attachment to the people that you're, you know, imprisoning or subjugating, that could be very difficult emotionally, I'm sure, for them. So I mean, nobody wants to get too connected to their work.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't even want to. I work in a warehouse. I don't even want to, you know, take my work home. You know, at the end of the day, I want to be able to, you know, to disengage and to relax and
enjoy
to go
your family
home,
and
enjoy my family.
Yeah.
And I know that if you're working with, you know, like in a situation like that, it's got to be very challenging. But
so you mentioned your wife. So how long have you been married?
oh gosh, I got married in 2017, August of 2017. But I've known her my whole life.
Oh, really?
Well, I shouldn't say my whole life. We were teenagers together.
Oh, nice.
During that troubled time,
where
I was looking for answers and kind of trying to find my way in the world. You know, I mentioned running away. Well, I was kind of, you know, housing insecure, I should say. I wasn't homeless, but you know, I mean, technically I was. By definition, I was. But you know, but I had a home. I could always go home to my family if I wanted to. But I chose not to, and I lived with friends, or I'd, you know, stay in the park or at the school or wherever. I would sleep in places like, you know. And I used to pride myself on pointing out to this was something that's funny with me and my family, is I would be like, oh yeah, see that over there? That's a cool place. You could sleep over there. You could build a little encampment over there. And my parents were so like, you know, put off by that. But I was just like, yeah, you know what? This whole world is just you know, not a playground, but it's a place to live. You know, like, and you don't have to live in a house or be part of you know, society in the way that you guys are. You know, I could you know, I could make it on my own. But anyway, so I was out there and on my own and but sometimes, you know, I want to go indoors and be part of a you know,
like a family, a community,
or community. But also, I'd go to this church, this youth group every Friday night. They would have you know, they would open their doors to teenagers, you know, troubled youth, you know, some good, you know, like upstanding, like Christian youth, and then some people that were just like coming off the street like me and hang out, get free food and drink, you know, listen to some music, see some other kids, you know, chop it up with some other kids, and maybe you know, develop a connection with a kid or two, and there was growth there. You know, so like
that's why I used to go to youth group.
You know, that's the thing. That's the thing is, you know, you want to go where other kids are at, and it's a safe place to be. You know, you know, you weren't going to run up against any kind of you know, like, you know, like generally thinking you would go to their, you know, not expecting to have any problems. You know, and so if you're on the street and you're kind of, you know, hyper vigilant about having problems, you know, about running into somebody or having a fight with somebody, or maybe having somebody, you know, having some kind of unpleasant interaction with the, either law enforcement or, like people within the community or other kids,
Sure.
you could go there and have a little bit of peace of mind, and it's kind of a safe place.
Sure.
And that was appealing, obviously, for me at that time. And I would go there and I'd hang out and I'd talk to people and, hey, what are you doing? I'm just trying to, get out of the rain or get out of the fog. Or it seemed like it was foggier back then too. It was always, like foggy and cold and wet, And if you're outside all the time, you want to just go in and warm up, go in, warm up, dry out a little bit, have something hot to drink.
Right.
And like you said, maybe mingle. And so I would meet some people and talk to them, and my future wife was there.
Oh, that's where you met her for the first time?
Yeah,
okay.
Her name was Kelly.
Nice.
She was cool. She had come. She was an outsider too. She came from out of state. She more or less booted out of her home and told to go live with some relatives. Out in California. She kind of came from a bigger town, so she had a little edge to her, and that was interesting to me. Oh, you've been somewhere. You did something. Remember, I said I was looking to explore the world. Well, here's a person that's been out there. She's been out there. She's from somewhere else. Let me pick her brain. Let me find out what it's like over there in Maryland or wherever she is from. Right. I think it was Baltimore area or somewhere suburb of that. But
so you guys just kind of maintained a friendship all those years, and then off and on, and then got married and just way later, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say we maintained a friendship either.
Okay.
But we had that initial interaction, and we went. I started going to that church a little bit because of her, and because of the people at the church. They were like, I was like, wait a second, this place is all right.
Sure.
And they're not judging me. They're encouraging me to come up here on Sunday, and I could ride my bike over here. This is cool, And so I went a few times, and they made me feel like my participation in it was, was important to them. Like, hey, let's have you come back, and then, hey, you've got, you're interested in the Word, you read the Bible, and you seem to be applying it to your own life in some ways. And do you, it was at that time too that I really had kind of a spiritual awakening, because I seen that that people could change, and that there was that there was this ability to have your life transformed, and I was looking for transformation. I wanted to change, but I just didn't know how.
Sure.
And I wanted to have a different quality of life than I had. I wanted to kind of somehow, I wanted to find peace within myself, but and I didn't know how. But so like, of course, the people there said, hey, well, look, you can find that peace right here.
Right.
And their idea of peace was, peace through Jesus Christ.
Sure.
And it kind of opened up a world of possibility to me. And I embraced it. I dove off into it pretty, heavily and zealously. I felt.
And this is when you're younger.
This is when I was young, very impressionable. Very. Informative in terms of like my development. It was, this idea was imprinted on me, early on that I could be transformed, that I could change, and that the way to do that was in and having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Sure.
And so I did, and I went through the the institutional kind of rites of all of that, and I did feel like, hey, I have hope now. There's this possibility for change, and I did start doing better. I got off the drugs. I started to live a different life. I'm still restless though, and so the thing is, I I signed up to go into the Navy.
Oh, wow.
I said, hey, here, you want to explore the world. Here's this opportunity.
There you go.
Dude.
Yeah.
You can go around the world. You can be on a submarine. You can go to different ports around the world. And so I was like, that was the thing is, well, which branch of service do you want to go on? We got the Air Force right here. I had family members who were in the Air Force. My dad was in the Army. My mom was in the Army. My mom actually went into the Army as an adult, like a not middle age. What's the middle age? Late 20s, early 30s. She went into the military.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was a nurse at the Valley Medical Group, and she was or maybe that's how she got into nursing. I can't recall exactly when it happened, but I know that she was working a variety of jobs. She bartended at this place called the LPI for a while, and then there was a place called the Lions Inn. She used to waitress there, and then she worked as a secretary and a stenographer, or did some kind of clerical stuff for an attorney in town. So she did a lot of jobs, and she didn't really have a professional identity or anything, but she was very independent too, and she wasn't really trying to conform to the idea of being some kind of housewife either.
Right.
She'd actually, she'd come from a Southern upbringing. She had, I think already experienced a lot of that in her first marriage.
Okay.
And it didn't work out. The first marriage was a disaster. She was married to an abusive guy. She ended up having to flee that situation, and she moved out here, to California, and met my dad. My dad was working at John's Manville. Okay. She was waiting tables at the Lions Inn, and he would have meals there.
Oh, wow.
On one of his shifts or another, because at that mine they worked around the clock.
Yeah.
And so some days he would be there for lunch, and other days he'd be there for dinner. Whatever.
Sounds like a movie.
The shift was. Yeah. It was very cinematic in that way. This way that the story unfolded. Yeah. But they ended up starting to date and whatever, and I think that they probably got very serious very quickly, because they were both ready, and then I came along, they bought a house together, and then my sister came along, and we grew up in the house together. But anyways, my mom, the reason I bring that up is because my family was both in the military, but they weren't like hardcore, military family. My dad just went in there after high school and served 4 years and got out. Right. My mom did her tour, as an adult, and was just really in the Army Reserves. Okay. But it was a way for her to transition from where she was professionally into something else. Like she went to, she went in as a combat medic. She went through, boot camp and then whatever kind of professional training that they receive as nurses or combat medics. And then she got out and continued her education. I think that was her way to afford school. Yeah. Yep. So she got this GI Bill. She went to nursing school. I think this is the evolution of it. And then she went to work for the Valley Medical Group. And she worked there for most of the time that I was growing up. Okay. And I should say that during my teenage years, and I ended up actually, and this is the kind of kid I was a horrible kid. I stole her car from the parking lot of the Valley Medical Group, and I crashed it on the road to Halama. Yeah, I was high on methamphetamines. I was listening to Metallica, nice. Master of the Puppets. Okay. I went off the road into a barbed wire fence and tore the thing all up, and I gave her no choice, but she couldn't afford to have her car fixed. Yeah. She had to report it stolen.
Did she try to sue Metallica because it was
their
dude?
Fault?
People
what?
do that. They're like, oh, what was my son listening to? It must have been the band's fault. It's like,
what? Yeah, it was. It's one of those really fast-paced songs. And,
it's a great song.
I was speeding, and I don't know if you're familiar with the road to Halama, but it's a really dangerous road. It's windy, and there's a lot of hairpin and blind turns.
Okay.
And then there's, of course, a lot of recreational vehicle traffic.
Yeah.
People going to the beach in their RVs and stuff, so they're making the turn really wide.
Right.
And you come around a turn at 70 or whatever when you're supposed to be doing 30.
Yeah.
And you end up off in the dirt and then fishtailing and overcorrecting
Right.
and going into the barbed wire fence. Barbed wire all under the undercarriage and around the wheel. Cow gets out. The cow gets out and maybe gets hit by a car. Now you're liable for the cow.
Sure.
You know, like
Sure.
so it was a disaster, and that was a disaster as a kid. Like the heartache and suffering that I caused my parents. Not to mention probably the money, but they couldn't afford to just absorb that as a So they had to. They had to report it stolen, and and I had to go down for that. And so, anyways, but so that's what in the kind of this circuitous way. That's what brings me to the Navy, is because it was one of those situations where, hey, you're blowing it, dude. We've been before this court a few times. Now you got this stolen vehicle. You're facing something with some stolen credit cards too.
Right.
Like I did some stolen credit cards and ran up some things on the credit.
So it's kind of like almost like a way out for you.
I think that was and this is again, I believe the privilege that was extended to me. Given my upbringing and probably my ethnicity and the fact that I was a boy too. Is that they said, hey, look. You're going to get this one last chance. You're going to go into the military. Pick a branch. Yeah. Get out of here.
Is this your parents telling you this? Or?
No, this was the courts.
Oh, the courts.
This was the courts.
Okay.
This was the courts, and probably in connection with my parents.
Sure.
Or collaboration.
They were probably all
collusion.
For it. Yeah.
They probably had a sit down.
Sure.
Hey, look, your son's going down the wrong path, man, and I know you guys have your hands full because there's documentation and maybe declarations where hey, look, we're trying everything we can. This kid's just he's a handful. He's a rebel. And we're afraid he's either gonna injure himself or others, if he continues in this way.
But I'm gathering from what you're saying that you didn't actually end up going into the Navy.
No, I did.
Oh, you did go into the Navy?
I did go into the Navy. I went into the Navy.
Okay.
That's the thing. And so I was at this church. I was going to church. I was having, developing these kind of bonds with people within the church. My wife, Kelly, a couple of others. And I mention the others because it's important to the story. But they, and then this event transpired, and and I had to go into the Navy. So and I'm a little bit foggy about it all because I thought I was doing good, and in terms of the chronology of things. As I mentioned, I was involved in this church, and then I was doing good, and maybe that's relatively speaking, because I do remember having this accident, and I think that I was under the influence of drugs during this accident. So I obviously wasn't doing as great as I thought I was.
Sure.
But I was trying, and that was the difference. Is I think I was making an effort to transition out of this place that I was in, and so anyway, so I embraced this opportunity to go into the Navy. So I say goodbye to all these people at the church. Hey, I'm going off to the Navy. And they're like, dude, good luck, but also be careful because the Navy is probably full of a bunch of problems, and problem personalities and temptations and, be mindful of the decisions you make going forward, and to be honest, the Navy, that was the least of my concerns. And so I was like, I'll be careful. And I went off and I went to the Navy, and at that point I did do good. I mean, relatively speaking, I didn't have any, I didn't do drugs or alcohol, but I had a difficult time transitioning. I went into the Navy. Basic training was hard. I didn't do well, like emotionally. Like I fought a lot with people there. I probably didn't rebel against the institution or the the people within the chain of command, probably out of fear or whatever. But I manifested that rebellion by fighting like my peers and some other things, people that would kind of like try to regulate me or tell me what to do, I wasn't feeling it. And so like hey dude, you're holding this up, or you're this or you're that, or maybe I was out of shape, or I was fat, or I was slow, or whatever, whatever they had to say. Maybe I was from the the wrong place, oh, you're from California, this and that. And so people were saying things to me that I wasn't feeling, and I was defensive of it, and I was hurt by it, and the thing that I do in that situation is I probably just lash out, and I didn't deal with it well, and I'd probably have a fight, and whether I won or lost a fight, it never mattered to me. I lost a lot of fights because I wasn't a good fighter. I wasn't, and I wasn't trying to pick fights with people, but I just didn't know how to. I didn't know how to resolve conflict.
Right.
And so anyways, so I get into fights, and when you get into fights in the military, it's a big deal, because you're supposed to be working together, for a common goal.
Sure. And
so I spent a lot of time in disciplinary situations there. They have a thing called disciplinary sidewalk intensive training. You got to get up in the morning. First of all, it's an early day for everybody, but when you're on DSIT, you're up, hours before everybody else, doing burpees and getting sprayed with a hose, and like a bunch of people yelling at you, and trying to get you to, like trying to break you down. Yeah, basically
respect authority, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they want to break your spirit and gain your compliance in whatever way that is. And so I do that, but then I in some ways I did it, and I conformed, but and once I got out of basic training, I told myself, look, just get through this and it'll be all right. Get out of basic training. This is just the way that it is. This is the way that this works. Get past this, on to the next thing, and you'll be all right. And it was and that's kind of my mentality in life anyways. It's just like get through this onto and hope that
this
the next
too shall pass kind of thing.
Yeah, really. Right. And so I did it. I went to machinist mate A school, and that was a mechanics class. Basically, learned about the engine room,
like auto mechanics, like cars.
Machine room, like engine room on
like a factory and that kind of thing, or
no, on a boat.
On a boat. Okay.
On a boat.
You're talking about in the Navy.
The power plant. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Power plant, engine room. So for me specifically, a machinist mate, third class. You can be a machinist mate on a surface ship, or you could be a machinist mate on a submarine. I was always kind of on the track to live and work on submarines. That was something that appealed to me, and so I did that, and I was good at it because part of my upbringing and part of the reason why I did feel empowered to go into the world was because I had a dad who taught me a lot of things. Taught me a lot of things. He taught me how to solve problems, mechanical problems. How to use tools, how to.
So you're like a tinkerer.
I was a tinkerer, but I'd worked on cars. Like
right.
Like he and I would do body work on cars, but we'd also do engine work on cars. He had hot rods.
Cool.
He was
take him on the cruises and stuff.
He would go on some cruises.
Nice.
He would go on some cruises. He had a Model A that was pretty cherry, and he'd demonstrate that a lot. He'd show that off. It was awesome. A 1930 Model A, but it was a coupe. It was a hot rod. It wasn't like restored to original condition or anything like that.
Yeah.
In fact, it didn't even have a Ford engine in it. It had a Chevy engine, and so it was a straight up hot rod. And it poppy red paint. Some kind of aluminum mag rims. It was, but he had a lot of cool trick, like electrical devices and custom made things and
that's really cool.
solenoids and all that. And this was in the 80s. But anyways, he taught me things and kind of empowered me and gave me the confidence to work with my hands. And so when I went to to machinist mate A school, I took off. I really had a lot of success.
Yeah,
with that.
You're good at it. Yeah.
I did good at that. I passed that, right away, no problems. Mm-hmm. And then from there, because I wanted to go into nuclear field and to be to work on board a submarine, I went through Naval Nuclear Power School. Mm. And Naval Nuclear Power School is a great school because it takes people out of the machinist field, the electricians field, and the electronics field, and it puts them all through this kind of very intense training in math, physics, thermodynamics, reactor plant chemistry. There was a lot of things very specific to the nuclear industry that you're learning in a very short period of time. It's really only like a 6 month school, right. And you're trying to learn years of college level material in that short amount of time, and so it's very intense. Mm-hmm. So you're going to school. They have great instructors. One of my instructors was a dude from Notre Dame, and he taught math, and he taught reactor kinetics. Okay. And then some other people taught thermodynamics and heat transfer and materials. There was a lot of different classes that some appealed to me, and some that I got really easily, and then some that had very heavy math based that I had challenges with. Yeah. And so this was an opportunity for me to lean on my faith. I worked hard. Sure. But there was things that I just wasn't getting. Yeah. And the way that the military deals with the problems where you're not getting something is they'll issue you mandatory study hours. So you're going to school all day, and then if you're having success, you can just get a suggestion of study hours. Say for all of these materials, come in and study for a few hours for each of your courses. Sure. Well, if you're starting to fail at a given course, then they'll issue you mandatory study hours. First, mandatory 10 hours a week, extra. Yeah. Mandatory 20 hours a week. If you're still not having success, mandatory 30. Well, I was on mandatory 40. So I'm going to school 40 hours a week, and I'm on mandatory 40 hours after. When do you sleep? I'm just not getting it. Yeah, it's 80 hours a week, dude. Right, and like you said, and you're still, but granted that is your whole job at that time was to go to school. Right. I didn't have to do a lot of stuff outside of school. Yeah. And so, wow. But I really felt like I was going to wash out. And at that time, the saying was 2.8 or Kuwait. Right then it was like the first Desert Storm. That was 1990, around then 1989 maybe, or 88. I forget exactly when it was, but it was right around 89, 90, I believe. And anyways, if you washed out, they would send you to the fleet, and straight into this war zone. Sure. Sure. And granted, as somebody on board a Navy vessel, that's less ominous than if you were going to be some kind of on the ground infantry soldier or somebody on the ground in a situation that's a lot less demanding. But really, the point is that I didn't want to go into the fleet and be just a regular sailor. I wanted this nuclear power education, because my goal at that time was to come home and go to work at Diablo Canyon. Oh, okay. That was my big plan. Right. Right. It's like I was like, okay, I'm going to go in, because I thought that was a legit plan. Sure. I was like, okay, I'm going to go into the Navy. I'm going to learn this nuclear power, and I'm going to come home and I'm going to work at Diablo Canyon. That's my kind of immediate, short-term, and mid-range and long-term goal. Sure. Like that's my career path. Yeah.
You'll be close to home.
I'll be close to home. I'll go out and see the world, and I'll come back to my to a place where I grew up in. I feel comfortable in. Mm-hmm. But so, anyways, I almost I almost fell down. I almost washed out. I didn't feel like I was ever going to get it. I had some kind of mental block with some of the, some of the math. But I prayed. I prayed about it. I leaned on my faith. I said, look, Lord, you're the creator of the universe. You're the reason that these formulas exist and work, and help give me, understanding of the, the principles at play here.
Sure.
Give me a breakthrough. And so and it was in that application of prayer and that faithfulness that that I did feel like there was a shift within my mind that whether you just kind of let this situation go, like with the stress and the pressure of trying to learn something new, and you kind of kind of come into this new place of acceptance, for the that hey, if if I'm meant to learn this, I'll learn it, and I did, and it happened. So it happened so immediately, and there was this kind of paradigm shift in my understanding.
Okay. That
I was like, okay, that is an answer to prayer, and it reinforced my faith at that time. I feel like there's a possibility that I could that I can align my mind with with the will of God for the universe, and I could find my place in the world, and I could understand things better, and so anyways, that's what happened. I had a breakthrough. I passed. I graduated nuclear power school. They shipped me up to Windsor Locks, Connecticut, where there's a prototype in the woods of the Connecticut. Windsor, Connecticut's a small town, populated and kind of they established in 1613. So it's an old spooky place, Like I think a lot of those New England places are spooky like that. And so
I've never been over there. I want to though.
It's weird and it's cold and it's depressing and but I was at this facility. It's called the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory, CAPL, and they had a S1C reactor there, and it's basically a empty hull of a submarine, and it might not be the full submarine, but it's the engine room and the steam plant, So in the submarine, or probably in any nuclear powered vessel, there's the engine room, which and there's the reactor compartment. And then there's the steam plant, reactor compartment. Whether a boat like that, whether you have a coal-fired, diesel-fired, nuclear fueled fire, you generate heat and you put that heat into the water, and the water, is transported, to this other place. In this case, a steam plant. It goes through this turbine, or at first it goes through this boiler. It flashes the primary coolant into, or like whatever, the secondary coolant into steam. That steam expands, goes through these pipes and turns this turbine. And gives up its energy to this turbine, condenses, and then goes into this kind of chill water system, and then back to the steam plant, and then so forth. It's a common cycle, and there's two states. There's a primary coolant, which is the reactor plant, and then there's the secondary coolant, which is the steam plant, and then there's the seawater systems that pretty much take away the heat and dump it into the sea. So anyways, that was basically just a big garage for me. I was at home there.
Yeah, playground.
I was a playground. I memorized all of the systems in there, and I graduated at the top of my class, and
nice.
Faster than anybody ever did before.
Wow.
Before me, I was what they call it the hot runner, the top runner. Like
a prodigy.
I went well. I would never say that, but I wasn't a prodigy. But I was I was adept at learning and demonstrating my knowledge of those systems in a fast way. And my interpersonal skills, my people skills went far, because I think there's probably interpersonal skills at play, and maybe politics as well at play, when you go to check out on a system. So you have this book, it's like a notebook, and there's many examinations, and they're like oral exams.
Sure.
And you got to go to somebody who's like a professional in this area, the guy that, like he's a superior officer and he's in charge of the engine room. So, I got to check out on the engine room upper level today, or this part of the system or that part of the system. Yeah. And then, so I'll go and I'll get grilled by this guy who's, master chief, or petty officer, first class, or whatever his ranking is, the senior chief, petty officer might check you out. Master chief probably not, because they got better things to do. But E6, E7, those guys have been doing it for their whole life.
Sure.
They're knowledgeable. They know the systems like the back of their hand, and they're going to grill you on it, and they're going to run you through some scenarios. These with casualty drills, hey, this main coolant pump, whatever, this goes down, this bearing fails, this main coolant pump recirc valve is closed, and you have this problem with this, and you find this, and what's the repercussions of that, and they'll try to test you in ways that demonstrate your understanding, conceptual understanding of the system. Yeah. And it's pretty easy. I think that people that work in any industry know that it's pretty easy if you start putting somebody to to some kind of pressure test like that in a situation. You'll expose a lot of the holes in their knowledge about something very quickly.
Sure.
And once you do that, then they fail, and they have to come back. I'm not going to sign your book today, dude. You got to go back and read some more, try to study it more, figure it out. Well, how do these systems work? How do they interrelate to one another? What happens when you do this to this? And so it was great experience for me, and I excelled at it. I did good at it, and I felt great about that. And I finished so early, like I said, that I went on to a secondary education and training in this area called and a certification. Really, I could have been certified as a welder, like a underwater welder or reactor plant maintenance welder, or I could have went off into this other field, which is what I chose as an engineering laboratory technician. It's basically reactor plant chemist, radiological controls. You kind of use it.
Did you like doing that?
I did like doing it, and I was pretty good at it. But then again, and this is probably where I've met my. I mentioned before that about quitting. When something got hard, or having a fear of failure. Like when. I started to feel like, oh gosh, this reactor plant chemistry, I'm not great at chemistry. There's a lot of math required.
Sure.
There's some things that the people that I'm working with are very smart, and I felt maybe like I wasn't, capable of doing that. And so maybe I chose wrong. Maybe I should have been a welder, but I heard that there were so many more advantages, to be an ELT. And so anyways, I started to have doubts about that. And then I did the work, and I was dealing a lot with the radiological controls. We were doing maintenance on the reactor plant. All the while we were exposed to radiation. You wear the radiological controls, self-reading pocket dosimeter, a thermoluminescent dosimeter. These are devices that you could either read, yourself visually, or you put it into a piece of calibrated equipment, and it converts the stored energy of the radiation to light, and that light is red as a certain amount of radiation.
Yeah.
And then they document all of that. Well, anyways, as a result of some of the work that I was doing, my exposure went up pretty high. And then on one day when we were working in the main coolant, in the reactor compartment, it was during a period of shutdown, doing some maintenance. The main coolant pump recirc lines have to be flushed. It's a low flow area. Mm-hmm. Some of the cobalt from the bearings collects in there, and it becomes a radiological hotspot. So you have to recirc it, kind of redistribute it through the system, you know, to kind of break it up and get it out of there.
Sure.
Because if it's collected all together, it's too much radiation in one place, where you have to dissipate it throughout the system. But anyways, during one of those recirc operations, you know, me and the people that I was working with on that shift were exposed, you know, to a significant amount of radiation, enough to that we were put out of work. You know, like that, and that was a problem for me because like I said, I didn't want to go to the fleet as a regular guy.
Sure.
I didn't want to go to the fleet as a regular guy. My whole hope and future was invested in this nuclear field, and so you know, anyways, after I realized that I didn't have a future in nuclear power because it's a lifetime allowable exposure.
Sure.
You know, that's the thing, is they're very conservative about it in the military. They're less conservative about it in the public sector, but still, if you get more than, you know, two rem of radiation in your lifetime, that's a wrap for you. You know, as somebody who would be authorized to work, you know, with radiation or around radiation, just because they're concerned about the, you know, biological effects of radiation on human tissue. So, anyways, you don't want to mutate or whatever. You know,
grow a third arm.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, anyways, so they were like, "Yeah, you're done in this," and that was a real blow to me, and I didn't handle it well. I didn't handle it well. They gave me the option of going to work in some other places. Well, I went off the rails at that point. You know, they sent me to some other base. You know, I was out in, you know, because of my math background now, you know, like they're like, oh, you graduated nuclear power school. Maybe you could work for payroll or somewhere, you know, like that. And for me at that time, that was such a dead end idea. You know, first of all, I was going to be landlocked. I wasn't going to be in the fleet. I wasn't going to be seeing the world. I was going to be stuck in some lame accounting job. You know, I was like, I mean, they gave me the option of just getting out. You know, medical discharge. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I got a medical discharge. I got general under honorable conditions. I you know, everything that, and I just flaked all the way out at that point. Like once I got out of the military, is
that when things kind of started falling apart big time, or?
Yeah, because I was back east.
Yeah.
And I never came back. I mean, I stayed out there for a long time. I was in Springfield, bumming around, skateboarding around. You know,
Springfield, Illinois, or
Springfield, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is a relatively, you know, big town for out there.
Sure.
Amherst College is pretty close to there. It's UMass. It was kind of a cool scene. The Pixies were from there. Yeah. They were playing there and doing that at the time.
Yeah, we're going to get into that next because you've mentioned punk rock a few times, and I want to definitely go down that road.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that was my thing, and so and then in New York, so I went from Springfield down. You know, from that whole part of the country is a lot closer together than people think.
Yeah.
You know, like you talk about Massachusetts and you talk about Connecticut, you talk about New York, they're all like within a couple hours. You can drive
through them all, like it's not like California where you can drive for 12 hours either direction and you're still in California.
That's exactly right. Like you put California on the East Coast, it'll take you all the way down to like Virginia or South Carolina or something.
Right, if you turn it sideways from like New York west, and then you probably get into like Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. You could cover a lot of ground.
Sure.
And so I just kind of flaked out around the whole East Coast, you know, but I never really spent any time in Vermont or New Hampshire or Maine or anything like that. But I was in Connecticut. I stayed in Hartford, Connecticut for a while. I stayed in New York City for a while.
Oh, wow.
And all different boroughs in New York City because I I mentioned just going to college campuses and hanging out.
Yeah.
It was a way for me to, like just hang out. I was with, I'd go to school with people. I'd make, stay in their student housing.
Just kind of make friends everywhere.
Make friends, hang out. I had drugs at that time. Again, I fell back on some of that old behaviors and some of those old ways of making money. So I'd cop some drugs and I would like try to sell it, to people because, and again, I felt like, man, I can fit in here. I can, I'd had a little bit of education, a dangerous amount of education, as they say, because I could kind of fake it. Like I learned something, like I belong in a college setting. And it was really just because I had 6 weeks of math at this nuclear power school.
Right.
But there was artists and musicians, and there was people doing interesting stuff too.
Sure.
And I hung out with a lot of those people.
Yeah.
And
so let's go into that then. Let's go into the kind of music aspect, because like what you've met, like I said, you mentioned punk rock a few times, which I'll tell you that's my favorite genre of music.
Yeah.
I'm definitely in that, but I didn't get into it until later. Like I was probably late high school when I first started to get. So for me, it's more like the '90s.
Oh yeah.
Kind of skate punk kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So like, what were some of the first bands that got you into punk rock?
Well, I love the Clash.
Okay.
First of all, I love the Clash, and I know that they're kind of mainstream in there. So
but early they were punk rock.
Yeah, they were, and the thing about the Clash is that for me now, as as somebody looking back on it, I don't listen to a lot of the Clash anymore. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I appreciated how diverse their music was, know,
right.
And so some of the things that people don't like about them, that's what I like about them.
Okay.
Like the fact that they're not just in that lane of being a garage band or being a 3-chord punk rock band. They, or
more like a Rock the Casbah came out. They're like, what the heck is this? This doesn't sound like,
exactly.
London Calling and all that stuff.
That's
or whatever.
right. Yeah, and all that black market Clash stuff and the reggae inspired stuff.
Sure.
And then even the stuff after that Mick Jones went off and did on his own, the Big Audio Dynamite. There was like a whole bunch of, that was a real dance music type of feel to that stuff.
Yeah.
And because he was really into hip hop and everything, whereas Joe Strummer kind of went off and did his thing with the Mescaleros and kind of a surf cat reggae vibe, and so. And that's a very interesting guy. I think Joe Strummer's got a pretty interesting worldview, and at least how he represented himself and the things that he spoke about were interesting to me. A lot of what is said in punk rock is interesting because there was a lot of room for diverging points of view and there was an open-mindedness to the way that people view the world and solutions to problems too.
Yes.
Everything.
Yes.
There's some really kooky things that were way out there and that would never work. Were totally impractical and not pragmatic at all. But ideologically were interesting.
Sure. Well, that was kind of the appeal of punk rock, especially in the early times. It was like it was for a purpose. It wasn't just about making music. It was about social injustice and some of these things that a lot of the more poppy kind of bands weren't talking about.
Right.
They were, and that's kind of why they were kind of the outcasts, because they were at odds with the government, they were at odds with society, they were at odds with school and church and like all right, a lot of that kind of stuff that was kind of the normal part of American society. And the punks were like, no, screw that, we're gonna go against that stuff. So
and I appreciated that. I definitely identified with that, and although I didn't have any real strong political views,
sure,
I was always just managing my survival and trying to figure out how I was going to live from day to day. But the great thing about people who do think about politics and about human rights and ideological kind of positions that that institutions have or that people have or people in power have, and it kind of expanded the way that I viewed the world, and it allowed me to maybe think about something more than myself too.
Sure.
You know, like
Yeah.
and about my immediate survival.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like. And so I did entertain a lot of thoughts, and I thought about, and I was like, well, what is that all about, and how, and how does one come to care about that kind of thing? I'm still impressed by people who have causes or who are passionate about one thing or another, because I don't really possess a lot of passion for anything, and I think that's another reason why I'm here. It's because I'm looking for, where's the passion? I mean, here's this guy Ryan. He does this podcast, and and that's interesting. And why does he do it? What is it that motivates him to do it? Because I have a difficult time finding motivation to do anything outside of work right now. For me, just getting up and doing my chores around the house and going to work, that's challenging, and my resources, are drawn pretty thin just doing that, and I think about, well, what is it that I would like to do after work, or people ask me, hey, what kind of hobbies do you got, or what are you into? And the truth of the matter is I don't have a lot. I don't have really any yet. I bought a boogie board. I went.
Oh, nice.
I went boogie boarding, and I got a wetsuit. And I got fins still, and and it was a lot harder than I remembered it. When I was younger.
Oh yeah.
But I did it, but I got my boogie board got stolen recently. I got stolen, and the reason I got it is because I dreamed of going back to the beach. That was one of the best things about living in this area.
Yeah, for sure.
Is I had a local beach. I used to go to Halama all the time. A lot of my friends were part of kind of a clique, but called the J Boys. And there was local surfers and knee boarders, and that's what I did. Is I knee boarded, I boogie boarded, I'd long board occasionally at Refugio or wherever. Also camp, Santa Barbara, like the camp, like the IV area. You got Sands, you got Campus Point, Devereaux Point. There's places you can longboard and boogie board and camp, like that.
Sure.
I camped a lot growing up. At the beach with my friends, like Refugio especially. One time, and this was the most bizarre thing, is me and four other guys, we were camping there at Refugio, and it was pretty good. The surf back then seemed a lot better than it is now. Like especially on the south facing pieces. I don't know what happened over time. The swell direction of the swell changed, or the topography of the ocean floor changed. But those breaks seem to be like a lot smaller now, or a lot less regular. But back then it was breaking all the time, and it was really fun to go and surf there and boogie board and longboard there. Anyways, and you could surf along the whole stretch of the beach. But one time I was surfing at this spot called Hazards, and it's kind of on the other end of Refugio from the point. And me and one of my friends was over there surfing, and we came in. And I'd seen, I was out surfing still, but I seen my friend Kevin running up the beach, and he was, he's like really animated and trying to get my attention. And I was oh crap, one of my friends must have got bit by a shark or something. So I paddled in really fast, and he was so stoked. I realized at that time he hadn't, he wasn't going to deliver bad news, but he instead reached into the front of his wetsuit, which he had pulled down, and he had stuffed into his wetsuit. He had what looked like kelp or a bunch of like vegetation, but he started pulling out handfuls. He's like, wow, and I couldn't make out what then he showed me, and it was these huge spears of weed. And it was like, and it was washing up on the beach, and then
really,
and then there was trash bags that started to tumble up.
Oh, like it came off a boat, maybe.
And then so we hurried up and we grabbed some like hefty bags, and it was full of sand and tar, and they'd been cut and then dumped, but they were washing up. So we jammed, we grabbed it, we ran back to our campsite, we hid it in our tent. We were all stoked. We were looking at it because we all smoked weed and partied at that time. we just couldn't believe our good luck, you know. And then, but then here comes the Coast Guard, you know, like patrolling,
Sure.
and they must have got on the microphones or made an announcement that they were closing that part of the beach. The lifeguards or the camp rangers or whatever, the county personnel would come out and kind of secure the area, you know, to prevent stuff like what had already happened from happening. You know, like, because I'm sure that it was continuing to come in. You know, depending on how much was dumped. But and I don't know how far that extended. I never really heard any reports of you know, of the seizure of this stuff or whatever, or you know, something about a boat. And now you would know all about it because it would be on the internet.
Someone would took a picture of their phone or whatever.
You know, that's the great thing about dissemination of information now. Is you know, you can learn about anything. Something interesting happens, or there's a car wreck. You know, you'll hear about it. There's the weed washing up on the beach would have been an event.
Top story.
Story. And so it did wash up on the beach. We got a bunch of it. We brought it home. We cultivated it and kind of cleaned it out, rinsed it off, shook out the sand, tried to pluck off all the tar, and it was just I had it all. I had my dad. I told you he worked at that mine. Well, they used to have these huge rolls of these big plastic trash bags.
Yeah.
And so I had my whole backyard was just stretched out with these plastic, you know, basically I lined my whole backyard with plastic. And I just had all of the stuff laying out there to dry out. Yeah. And I was ditching school and my folks were always gone. So I mean, I could do that, you know, like nobody, and then I had a backyard, you know, so I mean, it was relatively protected, you know, but, and it's Lompoc, so it's flat, you know, like it's not like people could oversee your, you know, see into your backyard really.
Yeah.
So anyways, we came up on all that stuff, but at that time, you know, I was into surfing. I was into going to shows. We'd go to Santa Barbara all the time.
Well, like who would you see?
I saw at Casa de la Raza. I saw a very early iteration of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, nice.
I saw them with Doggy Style.
Okay.
I think at the time they were called Doggy Rock.
Okay.
And then Minor Threat.
Oh,
and
dude.
And so that was all. It was the Screaming Sirens.
Okay.
And which was kind of like. You know, it was LA based, you know, Mexican punk rock, but with a female vocalist. You know,
nice.
And
I never heard of them.
Yeah,
check it out.
I'm not sure how and then how popular they were or how much success that they had, but I remember the bill, and it was pretty significant, you know, show.
Yeah.
And that place, the Casa de la Raza, was like a cultural center, and they used to have a lot of, you know, underage shows there. You know,
that's in Santa Barbara? Or it was in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, it was in Santa Barbara. Another place in Santa Barbara that I go to was the and I wasn't really allowed to go there, you know, because it was a bar.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
But it was called the Golden Eagle.
Okay.
And I'd see shows. I'd see people like Stalag 13 there. I think that was it. Bad Brains might have came through there, and which is another band that I really love.
Oh yeah.
By the way.
Yeah.
And for some of the same reasons I like
for the diversity, right? Because every album was different.
Every album was different. You know, from one song to the next, and even some within the same song.
Yes.
They would go from metal to reggae in the same song.
Right.
And those guys were a little bit crazy too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they were righteously nuts.
Well, like clinically, I mean,
clinically, like
HR, had all kind of mental issues.
Yeah, that's true. That's a fact.
Yeah,
that's a fact. And personally, I mean, like, I'm not here to judge any of them, but you know, some of the stuff that you'll hear people within the scene talking about, you know, like, oh, this guy was, you know, like in terms of being a human being and you know, the way they treated people. The way they treated, you know, women or, you know, or you know, people outside of their community, you know, weren't treated very fairly. And understandably, you know, people with mental illness, you know, treat people in all manner of ways without any real, you know, rational, you know, reason for why they do it. You know, so like, anyway, so yeah, I love punk rock, and I because it was exciting, and because it was inclusive.
Sure.
You know, I felt like I could fit in there. Yeah. That was a big. I don't know why, but it was such an issue with me. But I really didn't feel like I fit in anywhere.
Sure.
I didn't feel like I fit in my own home.
Right,
You know, like
right.
my parents, they grew up listening, and I loved some of the music that I was exposed to early on. You know, like my parents. You know, again, I told you they're white working class family, and my mom had Southern upbringing. My dad was kind of a, you know, he was a local kid, but you know, he was born in Alamogordo, New Mexico, but they came out here to California early on. And so a lot of his musical influences are kind of, you know, California country based, you know, not necessarily the Bakersfield sound, but he was really into, you know, outlaw country and stuff like that.
Like Merle Haggard.
Yeah, he liked Merle Haggard. He liked Waylon Jennings, but he also. But he also liked Willie Nelson, and I was surprised growing up too that, you know, like even as Willie Nelson got older, you know, because, you know, Willie Nelson's political views are different than a lot of the you know, the mainstream country or even the you know, the kind of traditional country, you know, music values. Sure. And some of that outlaw country, of course, is as well. But I mean, but not necessarily ideologically. I mean, they might have a little bit edgier or might be talking about slightly different things, but they're still mostly conservative, and they still mostly have kind of a you know, a kind of a folksy kind of morality to them,
right?
Where, you know, whereas Willie Nelson seemed to be a little left of that, you know, and so I thought, but I love Willie Nelson's music, and I respect his prowess as a performer, but also his prolific songwriting ability.
Yeah.
He wrote songs for so many people, dude. Everybody.
Yes.
And
he's been doing it for 70 years now or something.
Yeah. In fact, you know, that my mom loved Patsy Cline.
Okay.
And I know he wrote, you know, a lot of Patsy Cline songs and music. And so, but I grew up listening to Patsy Cline, Jim Reeves, you know, of course, you know, Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and then later on, you know, like there was Buck Owens and stuff too. My dad wasn't too crazy about Buck Owens, but he really liked Dwight Yoakam. Who's another one that surprised me, because Dwight Yoakam was actually in the punk scene for a while in LA.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
He's a remarkable character. And
was he like in certain bands? You mean like punk bands?
You know what? I think that it was a part of that inclusivity. Like he would just play the same venues. Okay. Like, you know, he was kind of a rockabilly figure, kind of like a Link Ray or whatever, but he would play his, you know, kind of a rockabilly set, and then go off into some of his country music, but he was just an outsider, you know, and that was the cool thing about some of those punk venues, is you could have a variety of music there, as long as there were people that were, you know, doing their own thing and kind of anti-establishment. He is definitely defying the tradition and the sound that, and plus and the morality too. I mean, I think he was very, you know, like in terms of his appearance and the you know, and the way that he carried himself. Yeah. You know, I think that he probably received a lot of negative, you know, feedback from his peers at that time, because of his long hair and because of you know, his kind of overt sexuality, and maybe even, you know, it would have been called some derogatory things probably by a lot of these kind of people to the right of him or whatever. Right. You know, and so. You know, they probably thought he was, you know, something, you know, and so anyways, that was it was a pretty exciting time for music. Yeah. And
so I'm sorry, back up with that a little bit. Did you say that you saw Minor Threat live at one point?
Well, I think so. I think I saw him. It was either Minor Threat or, I think that Doggy Rock. So I should say that Doggy Rock was composed of members of Minor Threat.
Oh, really?
And Doggy Style. So when Doggy Style broke up and Minor Threat broke up, but not Ian or
MacKay,
whatever, because I think he went off and did his straight edge stuff after.
We did Fugazi after that. He did Fugazi,
yeah. But I think that for the rest of his bandmates went off and did this thing called Doggy Rock.
So it probably had a different sound.
Had a different sound. Well, a slightly different sound. I mean, musically it was very similar.
Okay.
Lyrically it wasn't the same.
Right.
And nobody's got a voice like
that guy was awesome. I would have
awesome.
loved to have saw them live.
And I bought when I was in prison I bought that discography a few different times. That 20 song kind of
had every song they ever did, because they didn't release that many songs in general when they were together. So,
and my wife was really into Minor Threat too, because like I said, she was from Maryland, from DC area, and so she was into all the DC bands,
right?
And she was really into Minor Threat. So like, and that kind of brings me full circle to kind of touch base on her again. Mm-hmm. Because she was a punk rocker and she was an outsider and she still is in a lot of ways, she's the fact that she's in a relationship with me speaks volumes to the kind of intestinal like kind of fortitude and the ability to take an unpopular stand,
right?
Because so when I was in prison, one of those Christian people that stayed in Lompoc and kind of worked and lived in Lompoc would run into members of my family. My family is an institution in Lompoc, not because they're famous or anything, but because they've just been there the whole time, and they're stable. And so there's a continuity over time, of them showing up at certain places. They're creatures of habit. Right. They go to San Martin's on a certain night. Yeah. They go to shop at Albert's. And my sister worked at Carol's for 25 years. Oh, nice. Then she turned around and worked for Vaughn's for another 25 years. And very consistent and grounded and and stable people and people that other people in Lompoc generally know just because of that. Not because they're social. My parents were very antisocial. Oh, really? But they hung out with one another. They didn't have any friends. Yeah. They didn't do anything outside of their marriage to kind of join up with other members of their community. Sure. They did their own thing. But anyways. Some of these people, they seen my sister or my mom or dad somewhere, and they'd ask about me. Hey, what's up with Dougie? Oh man, bad news. He's in prison. He's been in prison for a while. And then you get various reactions to that. Oh man, I'm not surprised. I pretty much figured that's where he'd end up or whatever. And then, but some people were like, oh man, that's too bad. Do you think that he'd be willing to correspond with me if I reached out to him? Oh, nice. And my mom was like, yeah, or my sister was like, yeah, here's his address, sure, hit him up. And so I got this kind of, a couple of letters here and there from different people. Okay. And one of the girls was a Christian girl, and she was married and she's had a stable family situation, but she was ministering to me in a way. Okay. Like she kind of just reached out, hey, you're my brother in Christ, and you're in a difficult situation. So you knew her before you went in as well, this person? I did. I know her, and her name was Kathleen, and she's an upstanding Christian woman. She's lived a pretty interesting life herself, and very different than mine. I say interesting not because she was on the periphery or on the edge of society or lawlessness or whatever. She was a straight edge and straight and narrow her whole life, but she's faced a lot of challenges, and she's done a remarkable job of raising her two boys, under very difficult circumstances and in a harsh climate as well, because she ended up moving to like Idaho.
Oh, wow.
And so now she's a single mom in Idaho or something, and
Crazy.
she's raising her boys, in 10 feet of snow or whatever. And she's a pioneer woman.
Yeah.
And it's really impressive to me because especially for somebody who's kind of a quitter.
Right.
Anytime I see somebody just like grinding it out, and
it's inspiring,
and and proving, just demonstrating some real strength,
Sure.
some admirable quality, that I go, man, that person deserves my respect. And if you write me, I'll write you back, because you're somebody I admire and respect and look up. I would like to get to know better.
Sure.
And we didn't have hardly anything in common, and the correspondence was pretty bland,
Right.
But my rule always was, if you write me, I'll write you back, and I'll
Sure.
do my best to make it an engaging and entertaining
Nice.
letter.
Nice. Yeah.
And my penmanship will be impeccable. I really try to make it look good,
Sure.
and give you a quality, response.
Right,
when you get
right.
it, you go, man, here's Doug's letter.
Yeah.
And it's one page, or it's nothing. Maybe it's a postcard. I might not have a lot to say in some situations, but but I would honor that investment,
Sure.
and so this person, Kathleen, knew my wife as well,
Okay.
and they were kind of intermittently in communication, and so
Okay.
like a few years passed, and then my wife reached out to her, that's the kind of relationship they had.
Yeah.
Maybe every couple of years they touch base.
Sure.
Hey, I touched base, and then hey, guess who I've been writing? I've been writing Dougie. Oh man, do you think I could write him too? It'd be cool to get back in touch with him.
Yeah.
He and I, had a pretty strong bond back in high school. In fact, I thought he was kind of cute. Whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so she disclosed that, and this other girl's like, yeah, I'll help put you in touch. She, went through the formality of asking if it's cool. I said, yeah, I can have her write. And again, if she writes me, I'll write her back. And that's how it began. And that was in like 2009.
Okay.
We started corresponding, and we corresponded more and more frequently over time, and grew closer together, in our relationship kind of developed over time through correspondence, and it became a real relationship, where we were both committed to one another in terms of like, hey, expressing our interest in being in a relationship.
Sure.
And being, faithful to one another in that relationship, even though that wasn't a prerequisite or requirement
Sure.
of mine.
Sure.
I didn't feel like any need to
Make it go
to
beyond.
impose any kind of like,
Sure.
Well,
that's what I was going to ask you, because you said you got out of prison in 2022, but you got married in 2017.
Yeah.
So were you still in when you got married?
Yeah.
You can do that?
Well, yeah, you can do that, and it's challenging, but you can do it.
Okay. Do you get to have a ceremony and stuff?
I did have a ceremony. It was,
Okay.
after a fashion, it was justice of the peace.
Gotcha.
But and you're still in, prison when you do it, but it's in the visiting room.
Okay.
Which is kind of like that interesting, like, I guess you would call it like this interstitial, like, void, like between, between worlds, where they intersect. Anyways, so we corresponded for, what would that be, from 2009 to 2017.
8 years?
Corresponded for 8 years.
Yeah.
She lived in Virginia that
Oh,
whole
dang.
time.
Okay.
And
But she's from Lompoc originally.
remember I said she moved out here
From
east.
the East Coast. Yeah, that's right.
But then she came out here, and when we had met, and she spent some time out here, and then she went,
Went back.
she lived her life. So she went, I think she went to Oklahoma,
Okay.
and then she went to Virginia, and then she,
Yeah.
And then, anyways, she was in Virginia. She had, raised 2 boys in the time since I met her.
Okay.
I knew her.
Okay. Not yours, though.
Not mine.
Gotcha.
You know, because we were never together or anything when we were
Not
teenagers.
in that way. Okay.
Not in that way. We just met each other and we were friends. And she had a crush on me, as I said, and I didn't never know about it. You know, because we were in a Christian community, and I wasn't. And although I said it was interesting to see girls and to be part of a social scene, I wasn't really pursuing any relationships or anything, and I was there really for some spiritual nourishment and help. You know, and had I known that she was going to be that spiritual nourishment and help, you know, that God was going to use her in that way, I would have. Imagine if I would have got on, you know, that page with her back then.
Right.
But it took as long as it took, and we both had to be in the place where we were, where we came to be, to you know, to be who we were going to be for one another, and so she corresponded. We were committed to one another to the degree that she felt confident that if she moved out here, you know, we could visit with one another, because that's your right as a prisoner, is to have visitation. Yeah. Given that you are disciplinarily eligible for visitation, you know, and that's the thing, is even if you're in disciplinary trouble, because within prison there's rules, there's regulations, and you can get in trouble in prison. You know, even though you're already in prison, you can actually, you know, get written up for different things.
I would hope so.
You can catch.
Otherwise, you can do whatever you want in there, and there's no punishment for it.
Right, but you would be surprised, because in the past, I mean, apart from like assaulting a staff member or whatever, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to do, and you had this set amount of time to do. Sure. And prison was harsh, and it was a terrible place to be, but you had a determinate amount of time you were going to do. Right. You got sentenced to 10 years, you were going to do that full 10 years, and then you get out. You get sentenced to 25 years, you do the whole 25 years, and you get out. If you get sentenced to life, you know, maybe you serve your whole life. You know, maybe it's life without parole. Sure. You know, it kind of is what it said it was. You know, and then. But then over time that started to change, you know, and again, as the prison became more of an industry and an industrial complex, you know, it was better for business to have this kind of recidivism and also to have people who were already in prison stay in prison, and so and not to mention the counties that govern the legislation of that prison, you know, because each prison is subject to the laws of that county where it's built and established. Right. So if you're in a prison, say down south, or I mentioned Calipatria and Centinela, they're both in Imperial County. You know, so if you get into trouble in Imperial County prison, then you go to the Imperial County courthouse and you have your case heard. Sure, you know? Sure. And when your case is heard in that county, there's a certain amount of work that's required to legislate that case. You know, you have the public defender gets paid, the attorney gets paid. You know, the public what is that called? Not the attorney general, but the district attorney. They get paid. The judge gets paid. Then there's fines, and the fines get paid, and there's restitution. Restitution gets paid. So like there's money, and then there's tax dollars, you know, and then there's you know, so it's righteously an industry, and there's an incentive, you know, to prosecute a lot of cases, and not only to kind of inflate the numbers, you know, within that town, but you're almost going to guarantee a 100% conviction rate if you're trying somebody who's already in prison. Yeah, you know, like they're guilty. They're brought to you because they did something while they're already in prison. That's a you know, slam dunk in terms of prosecutorial, you know, what do they call that in sports when you have your record? You know, like, so they're just stacking up wins, baby. Right. I mean, they got wins on wins on wins. So they're, you know, 100% conviction rate in my county. You know, that as a district attorney, you know, you stand up there and you're trying to get reelected, and the sheriff in that county and everybody, you has something, an investment in that.
Sure.
And so, anyways, you're in prison and you get more time.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. Is I went to prison with 16 years, 4 months, and I got 9 more years, and then I got 6 more years, and I got 4 more years, and then
because you were breaking rules.
I was breaking the rules within those,
Okay.
and I was committing assaults on other inmates, but and it seems like, as far as the general public is concerned, it's a victimless crime because because they figure that it's one piece of crap committing a crime on another piece of
right.
That's their.
So you mean you were getting into altercations with other inmates, and that's what was giving you more time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're citizens.
Sure.
They're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And they have rights, and they have rights that are to be free of assault and assault with a deadly weapon.
Sure.
And an attempted murder. And hey, I'm supposed to be protected. I'm in here. I'm in prison. Doesn't mean that I could just be a pincushion for somebody.
Sure.
Yeah. And
you
so,
would hope anyway.
Then the county's like stands up in the way that they do it, and they were like, yeah, of course I'm going to prosecute.
Yeah.
This shouldn't be happening. And to an extent I agree with all of that. I mean, on paper, for me, like if you're in that life, if you're in the life and bad things happen to you, that's the cost of doing business within that life.
Sure.
So I didn't really feel like I should be prosecuted for the things that I was doing in prison, because I was doing them to other, gang members or other people in the life.
Sure. Sure.
And they weren't telling on me necessarily. It wasn't like they brought this charge against me.
Right.
It's
like a guard would see you or something.
A guard, everything's on camera.
Oh, okay.
The guards see things. You can't get away with anything in there, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people still get away with a lot of stuff, but if to be honest, if everything was, there's so much surveillance and there's so many points of observation that if they wanted to, they could find everything.
Sure. Sure.
They could find all the contraband. They could prosecute all the crimes. But a lot of times they just
they just turn a blind eye.
Or hey, I'm too busy to deal with that, or like to an extent they don't care. Like they're just there to do their job and go home.
Right.
And as an inmate, that's kind of what you want. Hey, this cop's all right. He's just doing his job.
Yeah.
He's going to be here for 8 hours and he's going to go home. He's not going to get involved with any of our business.
Sure.
Just like we're not going to get involved.
Right. It's like
they might say, "Hey, look, don't do any of that funny business on my watch. I don't want to do no paperwork.
Yeah.
I just want to go home. So
Sure.
save that for the night shift or whatever." You know what I mean?
Pass it off on the other guards.
Yeah. So there'll be something like that. And so that's a common thing. But anyway, so during the course of that time, I caught a lot of time, and when you're in prison, a lot of times the only thing it's really a microcosm of the larger world. So you have this society, and then if you cause problems within that society, you go to jail. And when you go to jail in prison, it's administrative segregation. It's called the hole. Ugh. So you go to the hole first. That's kind of like county jail.
Yeah.
And then when you're in the hole, you're just there kind of holding until your case is heard, and it's legislated and determined to be found guilty or not guilty of that thing that you are accused of doing.
Sure.
And so they collect evidence, they come in, they take statements, they might document any injuries, they'll build a case against you, and then they put that before the district attorney. The district attorney, says, yeah, I'm going to prosecute this. You'll get a notice saying, no, you're going to be prosecuted. You go to court. Once it's all done and it's established that you're guilty, they'll give you the issuance of a certain amount of time. Time added to your sentence, but also time within that microcosmic world where you've got to go from county jail to what would be the equivalent of prison.
Right.
And so a prison within the prison is called the secure housing unit, or the SHU. And the SHU is kind of like those places you've heard, Corcoran or Pelican Bay.
Yeah.
State prison has a
the
SHU.
place that the movies have been made out of.
Yeah, and Tehachapi has a SHU.
Yeah.
And I've been to all of those. You know,
Oh,
like
wow.
I've been to the worst possible places
They
within
move you around, huh?
within the California state.
Is that
system.
scary to know the kind of people that are in there with you? Does that?
Well, I was one of them. I was
Okay.
one of the scary people.
Oh,
I really
really?
was.
Okay.
And you know, and that's the thing that I believe probably, you know, helped me come to this place where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Is
I was gonna say, because I wouldn't have guessed that.
yeah.
You don't seem like one of the scary guys.
Well, and I wasn't scary in terms of you know, like I said, my physical prowess or anything, but on paper,
Sure.
you know, on paper,
The things you had done.
I was a bad guy.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like if you looked at the documentation, I was a bad guy. I wasn't a huge guy. I wasn't like a socially intimidating guy. You know, if anything, I was just a sneaky dude that, you know, that if or you know, if required, would be able to get next to somebody and stab them. You know, that's
Sure.
really as simple as it is.
Sure.
It's not a matter of me being a bad, you know, physically imposing
Yeah,
guy or like a
you're
bad
right.
dude. You know,
Right.
I wasn't a scary dude in that sense.
Sure.
But I stabbed a lot of people.
Okay.
And that's the problem in prison, is like that's the thing that that makes for, well, it, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword for the institution, because it helps the administration, you know, document and is supporting documentation for the negotiation of their contracts. And, you know, like, hey, look, we've got this, you know, this very challenging atmosphere here. You know, it's a very dangerous place. Look how many stabbings we've had.
Yeah.
In, you know, in this short amount of time. This is like the most dangerous beat in the state, they say. You know,
Sure.
and so that allows their union to, you know, to strongly advocate for them. And it also allows the prison to, you know, to hire more personnel, or to install, you know, more surveillance, or to,
Yeah.
you know, to purchase, you know, more equipment and you know, personal protective gear, you know,
Right.
and AR-15s and things like that, you know,
Sure.
because they use all of that in there.
Yeah.
I've been shot with wood blocks. I've been, you
Oh,
know,
wow.
had nerve gas used on me. You know, like
Wow.
I've been sprayed with like a water cannon that's full of, like, you know, pepper spray. You know, like so it's like a slurry
Yeah.
of just this burning, you know, like oil. You know, like that they spray on you, and most of the time you're just wearing your boxers and a t-shirt, or maybe you're just wearing your boxers, because, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens in the shoe is just, it happens in like a kind of a dog kennel type atmosphere.
Sure,
You know,
sure.
like, so you're stripped down, you know, and you're you know, you're treated like an animal, but also, you know, you're checked and undergo very serious, you know, security protocols and
Right.
you know, like inspections, you know, of both your exterior and your interior, you know, like,
Right,
so like,
right.
and so before you even want to go to the yard, you might have to strip, squat, cough, you know, undergo a wanding of,
Yeah.
with the magnetometer, and just see if you have any metal on you, or
Right.
inside of you, you know, like, and so you take your socks and shoes off, and you drop your boxers and you squat, cough. So it's very, you know, demeaning, you know, to a person that, at least at first, but then you become conditioned
Just
to
get
it.
used to it, yeah.
And over time, you know, there is this dehumanizing aspect of it, and you start to, you know, detach yourself from that reality.
Right.
And you can conduct these kinds of acts of violence that you might formerly not have even felt yourself capable of doing.
Sure.
You know, that wasn't my nature growing up. I didn't stab anybody before I went to prison.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I only did it there kind of out of necessity, and maybe even out of fear initially.
Sure.
I arrived there. What am I going to do? How am I going to survive this?
Yeah. What if they're going to stab you? Maybe
I'm
you're
going to
just
project a certain air.
Exactly.
You know, aura of like a. You know, I would rather be, you know, the assailant than the victim. You know,
yeah, exactly.
I would rather, you know, have a certain reputation or project a certain aura, so because in a way that's a defense of itself. Your reputation precedes you.
Yeah, because nobody messes with you.
And then you're like, hey, this guy's a nut.
Right.
This guy will really nut up and stab you.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but it costs you. You have to invest a certain amount of your life to get that kind of reputation.
Right.
So I had to throw away the first 9 years of my sentence. So I went from doing 16 years, 4 months to doing 25 years, just like that.
Wow.
But that was my strategy for maintaining the security. So it was based out of fear, and it was kind of an overcompensation for some of my shortcomings, maybe as a man going into this. So I felt like this is my way. I'm going to be safe. And so. And that's what I did, and it worked for me to an extent. I mean, after a fashion, I never got stabbed the whole time I was in there, and yet I don't want to take credit for that entirely. Like I said, it was my strategy. I do believe that I did have protection of divine protection throughout, and that God gave me the time and the security. And to live through a very difficult situation until I arrived at the place where I was willing to kind of to enter into a new stage of a relationship with him, because I mentioned I was kind of I had a formative experience as a young person. But then I got away from that.
Yes.
I got away from that, and I got deep off into this life in prison.
Yeah.
And then and I was kind of lost in that culture of this very weird world inside of prison where there's gangs and there's drugs and there's, so like I said, it's a microcosm of society, but it's really the dark underbelly of society. Like the worst elements of society are in there.
Right.
And so you're living in this world that's corrupt and that has very different values from the world out here, and so I started to get to this very dark place, but there was moments where I feel like a little calling out of the darkness.
Yeah.
God was like, hey, look, you don't have to live like this. You can come back to me anytime.
Right.
We can get through this together. I can help you.
Sure.
You just gotta lean into me,
Right.
to what I can do for you, and to this relationship that we started back then, but that you left and kind of
went your own way for a while.
You kind of walked away from it, but you're come back, dude. Let's do this together. And I'll see you out of this.
Sure.
And so, anyways, that's when my wife came into the picture. As I was at this very low place, I had kind of climbed this hierarchical kind of like chain of command within the prison structure, like kind of moving up the ranks, so to speak, as a person in prison, and I arrived at a place where I was respected for what I'd done, and I was more or less left alone.
Yeah.
But also, I had access to a lot of criminal institutions and gangs exist to secure the industries that they use to fund those criminal organizations, those gangs. So they sell drugs or they do whatever.
Right.
So they have drugs in prison, and drugs are sold in prison, and people who are of a good standing, they get an issue of those drugs to sell or to do with what they will.
Yeah.
And some of that money goes back into the institution, but a lot of it, the drugs are just there as a perk of being, part of this thing, and having, the respect of your community,
Right.
It's kind of like a, recognition, so like, here, this is for you,
Right. Right. Nice.
Well, it is nice, but at the same time, I was incapable of accepting that and doing anything responsible with it.
Right.
Might have sold some of it enough to buy more.
Right.
But at the same time, all I really ended up doing was becoming a drug addict. Over time, because I no longer had to prove myself. as a person in there.
Yeah.
I'd already been established, so I was kind of resting on my laurels, and I was just getting high.
Which, to me, I mean, that sounds like such a problem, right? You got these guys that are in prison. They're in there for a long time, and there's drugs in there. Yeah. And these guys are getting addicted to drugs and all this stuff, which is just going to make the issues worse. So you think they would be more like strict about that kind of thing, about keeping that out of there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah,
you would think so. I mean, there's those kinds of markets though exist for a reason.
Sure. Well, there's money. There's money.
A lot of money to be made, and there's
right.
money to be made for people other than inmates too.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, the people that work at the prison have to be allowing it to get in there
to an extent.
For a price.
They're either allowing it or facilitating it.
Exactly.
Or participating in the trafficking of it, to some extent.
Yeah.
It's just one of those problems where that are going to probably exist for forever. But at the same time, I wasn't, I wasn't doing well. Spiritually, I was suffering under the oppression of a very strong opioid addiction.
Sure.
I was addicted to heroin.
Wow.
But you can also get OxyContin and things in there too. So but at any rate, I was checking out and I was staying high most of the time on heroin.
Yeah.
And it made doing your time relatively easy. I mean, there's a real appeal to that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't getting into any more trouble. I wasn't catching any more time necessarily because, like I said, I was already established and I could kind of rest on my laurels a little bit.
Right.
If I got into trouble, it would have been for possession of drugs,
sure,
or possession of a cell phone or whatever, some kind of contraband related thing, but nothing violent.
Right.
And some of those non-violent crimes they're not even prosecuted anymore. And so anyways, I'm just kind of biding my time until I get out now. Maybe my strategy was just stay high the rest of the time I was in there.
Yeah.
But
get you through it fast.
Yeah, but it wasn't working, and I didn't have the money to maintain that.
Yeah.
That lifestyle, and over time you're gonna lose the respect of your peers because now you're just a junkie.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You're not the guy that everybody's afraid of.
Right.
Or the guy that everybody respected. You're diminishing and you're in value, and your status is lowering over time, and that was depressing to me, because I was proud of who I was, even though it by society's standards, there's no reason to be proud of the conduct that I demonstrated in there, but I felt like as a person, like, okay, I'd met the challenge of going to prison and living in there, surviving there.
Sure.
And so I was proud of it for that. I felt like I had been tested to an extent, and that I lived through it.
Sure.
But anyways, so I'm in this depressed state. I'm addicted to drugs, and here comes this this person into my life. This kind of person that allows me to recall a former time.
Yeah. This is Kelly you're talking about?
This is Kelly. Yeah.
Okay.
So Kelly comes into my life. She's writing me. She wants to have a relationship. I'm struggling with my addiction throughout the correspondence, but once it becomes, real that, she's committed, that she's talking about moving out here from Virginia.
Yeah.
She's coming all the way out here to visit me. I want to make sure that I'm eligible for visits, and in order to be eligible for visits, you got to be disciplinary free. Sometimes if you're in trouble, say you've had a drug conviction, or you've tested dirty, through urinalysis or whatever, or you're caught with possession of drugs, those might not be things that you would go to the hole for or go to the shoe for necessarily. I mean, you probably go to the hole, but for a very short period of time, and then you'd get out. But you'd lose your visiting privileges,
right?
Because the rationale for that is that the visiting room is where that's the place where all the drug trafficking is taking place. That's the only place that they can conceivably report that or document that there's drugs coming in, because nobody wants to admit that they're coming in through other channels.
Right.
Because that would be a major security thing. This is the only place.
But to kind of like, I think kind of to finish up before you got interrupted, I think the point you're making is that like Kelly was a big part of you cleaning up because you needed that visitation was so important to you, right? To be able to see her for visitation. You're like, all right, I'm off everything. I'm not getting busted for nothing. Forget that because I don't want to lose my visitation rights.
That's more or less. And the motivation for that wasn't so much that I wanted to have visitation with her, is that I wanted to give, I wanted to be able to give her what she was expecting out of the relationship. And that
Gotcha.
She's coming out here. It was a respect thing, really. She's coming all the way out here. She wants to visit. She wants to have a relationship with you. Don't be an idiot.
Right.
Don't throw it away.
Yeah. Make it worth it to her.
Yeah, exactly. And don't dishonor the commitment that she's made. And yet I did to an extent, because I was struggling with my addiction.
Sure.
That was one of the ways that helped me, come to realize, that I was powerless over that situation. Because everything, rationally, I felt like, okay, I want to be here for her. I want to come and enjoy a visit. I started to feel like, okay, maybe I have a hope for the future or whatever. But, because this person's obviously willing and serious and committed. And I had tested her in a lot of ways that I looking back on it, that, to kind of make sure she was for real.
Sure.
And when I seen that she was, then I felt like I needed not only to reciprocate, but I wanted to honor the, match her level of commitment.
Sure.
Sure. And I think that it was that and the fact that we were both kids together in the church, and I started to realize that okay, maybe this is has a deeper meaning. Maybe this is my this is God's way of helping me kind of get out of the situation. I need I have an ally here. I have somebody who's supporting me, but I also have a hope for a future.
Right.
Outside of prison. And because a lot of the years I didn't have any hope of ever getting out.
Sure.
Because I kept catching more time.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And I didn't feel like I really had a life to go back to.
Right.
Because I'd kind of squandered that life.
Sure.
And kind of threw that whole life away. So, she represented a life that I could have, and that's something that we could do together. And, so, and she stuck with me. Okay. And so we did have visiting, and we got married at Pelican Bay State Prison.
Nice.
In 2017, my parents were both there.
Oh, wow.
She was there alone, but with my parents giving her away and supporting her.
Nice.
And it was a justice of peace, and we were actually married with several other, prison couples.
Oh, they just planned it for a bunch of them in the same day.
Yeah,
okay.
because it's kind of a security issue.
Sure.
So that if you're going to have these people coming in from outside, because the people are allowed to come in to visit, and they undergo some security screening.
Right.
But to bring in the justice of the peace and to do all of that, and they open up an area of visiting and kind of like make that a separate space for the proceedings.
Sure.
And so we got married out there. So it wasn't necessarily a very romantic wedding in terms of traditional weddings go, but it was meaningful to her, and it unlocked the legal potential of what marriage means to a person in prison. And
did she have more rights to see you after that?
We both have more rights.
Okay.
And that's the thing, is if once you're legally married, then you're allowed to have a conjugal visit, which is a visit where you can stay overnight with one another.
Oh, wow.
And so you go out into a secure bungalow, kind of like a trailer.
It's private, but there's people like guards outside or something?
There's guards that come, and you have to, come out every 2 hours and stand, for count, So every 2 hours you get a phone call, hey, Hoover, step out. And then so you go out and you step out and you report and they physically ensure that
But you guys are allowed to be alone together.
Yeah, you're allowed to be alone together.
Okay.
You're also allowed to have some food, in there, so you could purchase, pre-purchase some groceries, because you're there for almost 48 hours.
Nice little date there.
Yeah, so it's a date,
Yeah.
and some people start families in
bet.
those situations.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is a lot of families are come to be through those conjugal visits.
Sure.
And so it sounds like a privilege that that people in my situation probably shouldn't be afforded, but I would advocate strongly to continue doing that, as long as a person is eligible for visits. 'Cause now, granted, if you have issues with violence or domestic violence, or you have some kind of case that would cause people, rational-minded people, or people who do those kind of screening process, to feel like, oh yeah, we don't want this person to have a visit like this with somebody else.
Right.
In the case of like a sexual predator or something like that,
Sure.
They're not going to be allowed to have those kind of visits. This is for people who are doing crimes that aren't classified as sexual in nature. They don't have any kind of designation or suffix, because they attach suffixes to different crimes.
Okay.
And anyway, so if you're eligible for it, you can have it, and as long as you're disciplinary free, and that's your incentive. It's like every 90 days or every 6 months, or however frequently the schedule goes around. If it's a very crowded prison, and there's a lot of people eligible for family visiting, and there's a lot of people applying, it's basically you sign up and then you wait your turn. And when something becomes eligible, you'll receive you'll be contacted by the family visiting department. Sure. Family visiting department will notify you, hey, you got an opening for a visit, coming up. Get with your people and schedule it on one of these dates, and then let us know, and then they'll approve it. And then once you approve it, they'll send you a packet back. They'll have like a checklist of different things you might want for your visit. Shampoo and some food and water and milk, eggs, whatever. You could do a shopping list, and then you have your money on your account already. Like you have an institutional account that they control, that you sign over control to, and there's like people can send you money. You could spend it at the commissary, or you could spend it at this. So it
makes it almost bearable to kind of be in this. I mean, much having
not having
that.
It's a semblance of a real life.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And that's the point. Is that's to give you a taste of what your life could be like.
It's incentive.
You have freedom to do this. Isn't this great?
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Isn't this something you'd like to have more of, and you maybe get out and do this full time?
Yeah.
And that's what it was. Is we were able to consummate our relationship, and to take it to another level of intimacy, and that evolution of the relationship was a powerful motivation for me, but also it did something for me spiritually, to strengthen me and to empower me to do what I needed to do to get out of that old life, and to commit to this new one.
Sure.
And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, and so we had a few of those. We didn't have a lot of them because I mean, like I said, they come up every once in a while. And
like, how often would you get to do that?
She had to move. I would say 6 to 9 months.
Oh, dang, that's a long time.
The thing is that depending on the kind of prison you're at, the prisons that I were at were horrible prisons, and they were always being locked down for one thing or another. If you have an institutional lockdown, if it's a huge incident, or a racial riot, or assault on staff, or like somebody died, they would lock it down and your visits get canceled, or there's no visiting for a period of time, and so like you can go a year without seeing your loved one, and you could go a year without going to the canteen, or you could go a year without receiving any quarterly packages. You know, you could just hard time it for a year and eat whatever the state decides to feed you.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do is in those prisons, they just bring the food to your cell. You open your cell, and you slide a tray in. You get like 15 minutes to eat it, and then they'll come back around and pick it up. Here's the tray back. Hey, where's your tray? You know, like if you don't give them your tray back, then it's considered contraband. You know, you're going to make a weapon out of it. Or
right.
Even though it's plastic. You know,
hitting people with lunch trays.
Yeah, that's the thing. Or, you know, people melt them down and make knives out of them.
Yeah,
it's like,
I'm sure.
It's one of those things, dude. Everything is considered a potential weapon.
But that's true. I mean, if you got the right mindset, you can pull that kind of stuff off. But
people are making weapons out of paper, dude.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like just rolling up paper.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
And glue and
So,
you know, gel caps from their medication.
It's gnarly.
You know?
All right, man. Let's jump in a little bit of politics stuff here.
Yeah.
Got an election in 2 days.
I know it.
It's a big one. You
know,
follow that at all?
I have been following it to an extent. I mean, I don't watch the news. I don't have, you know, television per se.
Okay.
But you know, but I have been following it. People are informing me about it.
Okay.
I have dinner with my dad twice a week.
Okay.
And or I should say once a week, and sometimes twice a week. But every Tuesday for sure, he and I go out and eat together.
Oh,
a
nice.
lot of times my wife will come.
Okay.
It might be the only time I see him during the week, you know, because I'm so busy. But
sure.
You know. But that's been a good thing for us to do. And anyways, he's you know, he's got one set of political values, and my wife's got another set, and then people I work with have another set, and you know, and I don't really have a lot of, you know, well developed political values. You know, I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And for years, I mean, I'm not eligible to vote. You know, that's one of the things about being in prison.
Oh, like you never will be?
You're marginalized and you can't vote. No. That's not true because you can, you know, your right to vote can be restored.
Okay.
And in fact, mine has been.
Oh, nice.
You know, because you know, because I've discharged my parole. So like, even though I'm a violent felon and I was on parole, you know, once you discharge parole, you know, now you're a citizen just like everybody else. Okay. And I have been afforded the right to vote. And the thing is I just haven't exercised that right this year, you know, and I don't know at what point, you know, I will come to that place. Cause it's kind of like there's this inertia, you know, I mean, I've kind of gotten so used to just,
you're jaded,
not being, you know, a part of that process, you know, like you know, like, and also not even, you know, identifying or formulating any, you know, like values or strong position, you know, political opinions, you know.
So you feel like you don't really have any strong opinions about anything?
Well, maybe that's fair to say but just because of the word strong. Now I might have opinions about things, but
there's no hills you die on.
I don't feel passionate about anything, and I don't know if I would die on any hills. I do feel like basic human rights and you know, are important. Okay. And I am fairly liberal in my idea that you know, that people, you know, deserve to be, you know, loved and and have their basic needs met, you know. Sure. And now, pragmatically, how do we do that? Right. I don't know.
When you say basic needs, you mean shelter, food, water, that kind of thing?
I think, housing security, food security. I think that those things are important. Sure. And a lot of people don't get that. I think access to, you know, to healthcare is probably important too. It's not a basic need, but I mean, it is something that in a world where, you know, medical care is available, that even the least of the people in society should be, you know, allowed access to that.
And you think the government should, in some way, shape, or form, provide those things?
Well, it's hard to say because, I mean, who pays for it? Right. I don't really have, you know, I've got a very cynical view of the government and institutions in general, just like who, you know. I feel like a lot of them are mismanaged and corrupted, but so like who does what? Like
Right.
as a Christian person, I feel like it's hard enough for me to to love my neighbor and to and to do the things that I'm supposed to do as a human being, and as a spiritual being,
Right.
And I often say, well, how do I apply my resources? How do I steward the resources that I have to help other people and to be a good neighbor?
Right.
And that's a difficult thing for me to do. Like, how much of my money do I give to?
Right,
What I
right,
mean? How much
right.
of my time do I give
Sure.
to people?
Yeah.
Like, and where do I apply those resources?
Right.
And at what time? And what's the criteria for
Right.
Because I do look out for people.
Sure.
I see somebody, here you go, brother. Here, take this.
Yeah.
I want to devote my time. Maybe I'll go speak somewhere. I try to give back to the community. In
Do you
some small
do
way.
that? Do you speak places?
I do. I am starting to.
Okay.
And that's part of another reason why I'm here. Is
Nice.
It's like I'm trying to make sense of what it is that I've been through and reconcile that with the with my spiritual identity and like, okay, if this is transpired and kind of evolved for a reason, then what's my next step? What do I in terms of if you look at your personal experience as a resource, something that I have to contribute to the world, like going forward, like
Sure.
So how do I take that experience, that resource of my lived experience and apply that going forward? Like, how do I steward that?
Just tell the story, man.
I tell the story.
I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah, maybe I go to to this juvenile detention, or
Absolutely.
maybe I go over here to because I spoke at this the day reporting center, which is a place where I've gone during my parole, like to receive counseling, to undergo some behavioral kind of behavioral and anger management treatment.
Sure,
like there's
sure.
courses that you kind of are mandated to attend as a person on parole. That's part of your reintegration.
Right.
You show up, you go to these courses, and then you get documentation that you completed them, and now you're it's one of the things that you're required to do.
Right.
It's a prerequisite for getting off parole.
Sure.
But because I went through that, and I stayed sober through all of that,
Right.
and because of the relative success that I'm having, as a parolee and an alumni of that program, sometimes they'll ask me to come back. And hey, I want to speak to the new guys. There's guys that are just coming out.
Yeah, see, that's awesome.
So I feel like that's the way that I am able to to make something from my past count in the present.
Sure.
And it's kind of a ministry. But anyways, and a ministry for me is just like, okay, how do you apply your resources?
Right.
And so for the government, how do they apply their resources? It's difficult for me to say, because I feel like I have a degree of like epistemological humility about decisions that people make. Like, I don't have the answers. I don't know what the best way to do a thing is. I'm pretty much just trying to figure it out myself.
But that's relatable.
Yeah.
For people that are going through the same thing, to have you tell them, I used to be you, or in some ways I still am you with the struggles that I'm having and the thing. I mean, that's what people want to hear. They don't want some guy who's been straight-laced his whole life, never even been to prison, trying to tell them, because they're like, this guy doesn't even get me. He doesn't understand. This guy's had a great life,
That's a fact. And I've scoffed at people like that in the past.
Right.
And it's the same way with, sometimes with, people in the ministry and people with a mission. Is like, they're trying to spread this good word, and it's honorable, but in a lot of ways it's unrelatable.
Yeah.
And you have to be of a mind to hear it. You have to have ears to hear it.
Yes.
And sometimes the thing that opens those ears is that relatability, and that the fact that, okay, here's an authentic voice. This is somebody whose message I can listen to because I respect
Absolutely.
where they're coming from.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's a big deal, and the Lord uses that kind of thing.
I believe that's true.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to be responsible with now. And that's part of why I'm here, but also I'm looking into maybe some some other venues, and also I'm thinking that I'm in the process of and again, this is the human aspect of it and the difficult aspect of it for me is I probably want to obtain some certification or degrees in drug and alcohol counseling.
Oh, nice.
Or some. I have a degree in behavioral science. But at the same time, and I got that in prison. It's one of the reasons I'm out of prison earlier than I should have been. Is because as you earn degrees in prison, they'll knock time off of your
Really?
sentence. Yeah.
Well, there's incentive.
That's another incentive, and we talk about politics. That's one of the things that's only come about in the past few years.
Well, see, so that's something you probably do have strong opinions on, though, when talking about things like prison reform and certain things that are happening within the prison system that you would say, this needs to change, this doesn't work, or I mean, do you have stuff like that?
Well, it would take some real introspection and some thought. Okay. But I do have some feelings, and I recognize the limitations of the system and how the system is broken in some ways. And yet I don't, because of the self-doubt and the lack of esteem that I have from my own point of view, I just figure that somebody else is already, working on that. Like who am I to,
Could be, but they don't have your personal perspective of it.
That's true. And so that's the thing is maybe, who knows what the future holds, but maybe as I progress as a human being and as I, do more and more of this kind of work and my voice is recognized as somebody who has something to say on these subjects, then you become part of a commission. You get asked to, contribute, reasonable and substantial ideas, like actual, strategies and long-term plans for like reform, those are because it's one thing to be ideological about something, and it's also a whole different thing to be pragmatic and to have a plan.
Totally.
And so, how do we get from the system's broken, it needs to be changed, to actually changing it in a meaningful way?
Right.
I think that's the challenge.
Absolutely.
And I think that most rational people would agree that that a lot of the things about the system are broken, and it vacillates too. I mean, sometimes people want to have tougher laws, on certain crimes, and then other times, and we're kind of in one of those periods now where nonviolent crimes are almost not prosecuted at all. Right. And then because of the attention in the media on those nonviolent crimes right now, we're talking about maybe going back to prosecuting them again. And
where do you fall there?
Yeah.
Do you think they should be prosecuted more, or do you like the leniency of it?
Well, it's hard to say because, I mean, we've kind of been there and done that before with the prosecution of petty crimes. Sure. And we had an overpopulation problem in the prison. And so, if we just start prosecuting them again, then, maybe we fill up the prisons that we've already built. But the chances are, because the population is growing all the time and there's more and more criminals, you're going to still need to build more prisons, and you're going to need to further.
Yeah, but I know lots of people that say, I would gladly have my tax money go to that.
Yeah.
Right? Like they had no problem with their tax money going to building more prisons if they're needed to house criminals and to prosecute these laws.
Yeah, for sure.
Or these crimes, I mean.
Well, and that is the way that society has chosen to deal with the problem of crime in the past, and that is a definite strategy, and it's effective in the short term for sure. You're getting criminals off the street, you're housing them somewhere. That they're sending them out of state even, and housing them in Arizona and housing them in Oklahoma, because it's cheaper to house them there. So they got these tents out in the desert, and they just put these guys over there, and it's kind of like exporting political prisoners to Guantanamo in a certain in a certain fashion, because it's not only is it cheaper, but because the laws are different there. And granted, if you're a prisoner of California, it's said and it's expected that you would be afforded the same rights and privileges that you would in Oklahoma as you receive in California, because you're still technically a California prisoner. You're just out of state. But the legal problem with that is, and this is where they ran into trouble, and I think they had to reconsider this strategy, is because they're transporting these prisoners across state lines without, and it's a federal, it becomes a federal issue of extradition and occupation of these other states, because where do these prisoners fall? They're not federal prisoners,
right?
And so, anyways, but so that was one of the ways that they dealt with prison overpopulation and prison and the cost of housing prisoners, because it's prohibitively expensive. That's the other thing,
right?
Is to house people, and people say, yeah, I would gladly pay, to house them and secure a prisoner for an indefinite period of time. But
sure,
but it's more expensive than people realize, because it's not just the prisoner that you have to house and feed and clothe and or the prisons that you have to build and pay to staff and all of that. But there's I lost the thread of my thought there, but
that happens to me all the time.
But because there are difficulties,
Sure.
And I don't think that just building more prisons is the answer necessarily.
Right. Right. Well, do you think it'd be that the answer is more prohibitive, like figure out ways to keep it so well, because a lot of times people talk about it starts like for you, it started when you were young, right? Like you started committing crimes when you were young, you were stealing, you were shoplifting, like you said.
Yeah.
And I know you said you came from a good home, although you did say you're kind of like a latchkey kid, right? Like you're
that was normal for
that was normal
80s,
back then, yeah. But I mean, a lot of people would say that's where it needs to start. Like the education needs to go into a lot of these families and the parenting and raising children in a sense that they wouldn't, because a lot of the kids that are going to crime don't have what you're talking about. They don't have good parents that are.
And that's the thing. How it's so difficult to be a parent and to be a good parent.
Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, and we entrust people with the development of children who are unqualified to do it.
Right.
That's part of him.
Sure.
Procreation. You don't have to have any credentials.
Just gotta have parts that work.
You gotta have parts that work. And understandably, there's going to be some complications, and you're going to have some bad results.
Right.
Of that parenting process.
And sometimes it's a cycle.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you have a certain kind of parents, and then you grow up and have children, then you're going to kind of be a similar kind of parent. And sometimes it just goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's generational,
sure.
Knowledge that's passed on and experience that's passed on. And, and that's the thing is some of that generational stuff, extends, it extends beyond the family as well. I mean, there's so it's difficult to say. It really is. And the way I perceive it is, as I know that I don't have the answers, and I'm very slow to criticize people in those positions.
Sure.
The people that make decisions, the people that are trying to manage this country. I know it's difficult to manage my own life. I know it's difficult to manage a business.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
See management styles. Like it's difficult to manage a business. There's always going to be somebody that has alternate strategies and better what they feel are better ideas. And and yet I so far I'm not one of those people. Like I don't have any better ideas right now.
Sure. Sure.
I don't feel like I do. And when I say that I don't feel like building more prisons is the answer, that's not because I feel like I have a better solution or an alternate solution.
Sure.
It would be great to start earlier. It'd be great to deal with people from an early age and get them feeling good about themselves and empower them to make better decisions.
Right.
how do you do that? I mean, education is obviously important.
Education or mentorship, like you mentioned, your across the street neighbor who took you fishing.
Mentorship is really a key,
right?
And I think that's the kind of thing that in the past and in smaller communities and and we'll call them tribal communities.
Sure.
There was a structure in place where you would receive training and you would go through rites of passage and you would have a mentor. You would have mentorship. You would develop to with a group of peers in a way that where your progress was monitored and your development was cared about on a much more intimate level,
right.
Because you're in large part related to that person and your mentor was invested in your success. They wanted you to succeed and to do well, and lots of times you were there was some self-interest in your development,
yes,
and your success, because maybe I'll be relying on you to take care of me later.
Sure.
Yeah. I want you to succeed and I want you to do well and I want you to be a strong and independent man or woman, and because generationally,
yes,
I myself, as I go into my seniority, I'm going to rely on you, but also because it gives me peace of mind to know that future generations are going to be equipped to face the challenges of life, and that our genealogy will continue and go on, and and we'll have success as a people, and our story will be told for years to come.
There you go.
That was a thing, and there's less of that now.
Yes.
Because I mean, we're all so independent, and society is so fragmented that our collective story is a thing that is a lot more abstract. It's not as linear.
Yes.
And so and those diverging trajectories, those different story arcs, become. I don't know if you've ever written creative writing or done any kind of writing at all, but if you have these different storylines and they're going off in different directions, this tale that you're telling becomes muddled and complicated, and it becomes difficult to follow, and
unless you're really good at it.
Yeah, you have to be brilliant.
Then you can do that, and then you can bring it all together at the end. You're like, oh, that's how it all connects.
Those are the best books, and they're this fat, and and it takes you a year to read it, but you might never put it down. And you'll never forget about it either, because your mind is blown. But and that could be the story that we're writing now. That could be the story that's happening in society now, where we're all looking at the different storylines and we're going like, man, how is this ever going to make sense?
Yes.
How are we going to reconcile all of this and bring it together in the end? And maybe it's a powerful tale that's going to be epic. Like you said,
that's right.
It's going to blow people's minds.
That's right.
But that's the thing, is it's going to take one author to do that.
Yes.
It's going to take an incredible mind to do that, and it might be a group mind, a collective mind, that gets together and
might be AI.
It might be AI too. Oh my God, you hit it on the head.
Who knows, right?
That's true. And and how exciting is that? But politically, I don't have a lot to contribute to the conversation.
Okay. Well, there's just one last one thing actually that I wrote down earlier that you said that we'll kind of talk about this for a second, and then we'll move into a little bit of spirituality before we close out. You had mentioned white privilege, male white privilege, and you were kind of using it in the context of early, like years ago.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, do you still think that's something that's still true today?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, I do, and I see it at play in the world all the time still.
Okay.
And despite the fact that we're aware of it and that we, recognize it as something that exists, but that's that's the thing about having a society that was largely founded on and is structurally, constructed, upon the, the point of view of, of educated and privileged white men.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And so
I don't think anybody's denying that that's kind of how the country started. That's how it founded. I mean, most people would even say that racism was very strong in the founding of the times of the founding of the country.
Yeah,
you had slavery, you had Jim Crow, you had all these things happening.
And that's true.
But I'm just kind of curious, like, because for me, I hear people say things like, yeah, racism is worse now than it's ever been in our country. I'm like, it's worse now than it was in the times of slavery. It's worse now than it was in the times where certain people couldn't go in certain restaurants. It's like, really? It's worse now? Are you kidding me? Like, that seems like a little far-fetched to me.
Well, probably. I mean, because it's more. I think that it's universally acknowledged that that people have the right to not be enslaved.
For sure. I'm with you.
Person. And that that our society has an interest in promoting competition and opportunities for advancement, to people who enter into that arena and compete for those opportunities.
Sure.
My problem is that from a personal point of view, like, and this is the point of view of somebody who does feel privileged to a large extent. There, and I don't feel like it's a matter of race necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think, and in a lot of ways, I think that my experience has been one that people haven't attended to me and in a negative way.
Okay.
A lot of my life, like I was met with acceptance and encouragement, mm-hmm. most of my life.
Sure.
And that does something to a person in terms of their confidence.
Sure. Of course.
Like I felt like I could go, mm-hmm. I could go anywhere and I could do anything.
Right.
And if I didn't, then kind of shame on me,
Sure.
because I just kind of didn't care enough about something to try, or right. I didn't take advantage of the opportunities that I was afforded.
Sure. Right.
But I likewise I feel like some people, people that have a different upbringing, mm-hmm. maybe they see the world in a different way. Maybe they're less confident, or they feel less encouraged, to compete and to vie for the for these opportunities.
Right.
I think that there are powerful developmental kind of mm-hmm. Experiences and things that are formulated early on.
Yes.
that kind of put you in a state of mind, mm-hmm. To either to be encouraged to do something, or right. to be discouraged.
Yeah, and that's why I would think that would be, I would consider that more of a cultural, not an ethnic thing. Because like, you just take the quote unquote white community.
Yeah. Right.
And most of the time people want to talk about the lawyers and the doctors and the kind of that kind of rich white community. It's like, well, what about the communities that we would consider white trash? Yeah. They're living in the trailer parks. Yeah. They're doing, they're kind of the stereotypical hillbillies. Well, and that's the same kind of thing. And they're raising their kids a certain way. Yeah. And they're not going to be getting in necessarily into the good schools and stuff, because they don't have the intellect. They don't have the, like you said, the push, the encouragement necessarily. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly right. And
mm-hmm.
and I think that that's one of the intrinsic problems with, with using language that is associated with race, and
Yes.
maybe I shouldn't have said white privilege, because maybe it's not a question of ethnicity or skin color in my situation, or but in
it's more that you came from two parents that loved you and cared about you.
I think so, and then I was afforded every privilege, and
Sure.
I didn't take advantage of that.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that superficially and instantaneously, like people, perceive the world around them in a way where classifications are made, and
for sure,
and
yes.
and people are identified like based on the color of their skin in some cases.
Yes.
But I also recognize that because of the diversity of skin color in the world, that's becoming and increasingly insignificant.
Yes. Yes.
But at the same time, it's very significant to people who have grown up in communities that in non-white communities. They're called, they might refer to themselves as people of color or whatever, and
sure,
and they then at that point, have they, what has their experience been like? Have they felt like they belong to this institutionally? Do they belong in this world as much as as I do, or is this
Right.
And so it's when I was in prison, there was a lot of racial division.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
And that's one of the ways that the administration classifies people.
Oh, really?
Like when you come to prison, there's basically white, black, Hispanic, Asian. 4 classifications.
And they all kind of hang out together and kind of click up, and they don't really.
Well, that's the thing about those kinds of systems. Bureaucratic systems and institutions.
Sure.
They'll throw you in the, because it's expedient and convenient for them to classify people, and legally, okay, how are we going to house everybody? We're gonna, how are we going to segregate people?
Right.
Because in prison, if you have incidents, among the races, then they have to isolate and segregate those elements of that microcosmic society.
Sure.
So so they throw them all into these different categories, and you're either white, black, Hispanic, or Asian, or other. I guess they call it other, and that it could be American Indian, Asian, Filipino, or Polynesian, like that.
Sure.
There's
Eskimo. There's all kinds of different.
Well, and that's the thing. Depending on where you're in prison,
Sure.
and the population of those communities, you'll
Right.
end up with a pretty substantial group of others, and that's the thing, is there, and that's the reason I bring that up is because doing that in a society is that's part of the pragmatism of running something,
Sure.
running a prison system or running a country.
Yep.
Is how do we classify and care for the various elements of our population, and yet when the population, when the governing body of the prison was depending on which prison you were in, if you were in a southern prison and the majority of the staff were Hispanic, a lot of the Hispanic inmates would be shown privilege.
Oh, really?
Because it's maybe seemingly natural.
Say like, oh, you're one of my own.
Yeah, like I not only culturally do I relate to you, but I might the lines of communication might be more open between us.
Sure.
I feel like I can communicate with you, maybe because of the language barrier, but also because I identify with you more.
Do you see that as a bad thing, though?
No, I think that it happens a lot because it's natural, and it's it's easier.
Right.
It's one of those things where, I see a familiar face. I'm going to reach out to that person. And I'm going to speak to you in the language that I feel comfortable communicating in.
Right.
And I'm going to rely on you as an ally to help me disseminate information.
Sure, but like if the Hispanic,
structure.
if like the Hispanic guards, let's say, are treating the Hispanic prisoners better than, say, the black inmates or the white
black
inmates,
or whites or whatever.
Would you see that as a bad thing, or do you see that as like a prejudice?
I'm using
sense?
it as an example of bias and the the way that it manifests itself within society, and even a microcosm in society. Because I don't see it as a bad thing. I'm not qualifying it morally.
Gotcha,
I'm just saying that's kind of human nature.
You're saying it's what happens.
It's what happens.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to reach out to somebody that's familiar to them. They're gonna afford them. That dialogue immediately elevates them in status.
Sure.
Because now I'm on a level where I'm communicating with you. If once you open a line of communication, and now you're seen as an entity worthy of exchanging communication. I'm not just giving you orders. I'm investing a certain amount of trust in you that I'm going to communicate with you, and I'm also asking you to disseminate this information to others like you, people in that community that on that side, and it's that initial, reaching out and investment of trust in somebody and communicating with them that starts it all, and
sure.
And
yes.
now and I think that happens in society here. That's my point. Is I think that and so like in Northern California prisons, there might be white guards that would do that with white inmates.
Yeah.
In the Bay Area, there might be black guards that do black inmates, and so you'll see that it's just kind of. That's an observation.
Yes.
It's an observation. But I do believe that happens in society still here.
And I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that probably does happen in all those scenarios. But I would go a step further and say I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
I don't care which ethnicity it is that's giving favor to their own ethnicity. I think they should all be treated the same, regardless of whether or not
is I think that maybe. That even just deigning to communicate with somebody is showing that person favor.
Right.
Because now I'm elevating you in status of a peer. That we're having a dialogue.
Right.
And so especially when there's an inequity of power, when you're supposed to be a prison guard and an inmate.
Yes.
Right. If I so like that and in society that happens as well. So you have these people in position of power, and it doesn't matter which ethnicity we're referring to, because we've already demonstrated that it's Hispanic, black, white, whatever.
Sure.
A person in power is going to see and identify other people within their jurisdiction or community or whatever, and they're going to make a selection of who it is they want to interact with and who they trust to ally themselves with. And that's the kind of thing that could be seen as privilege, because it's a privilege of me, recognizing you and you, and us having this interaction.
And I would agree with that. I mean, that's obviously privilege.
Yeah.
You're being awarded something or treated a certain way based on what you look like, basically.
And it's a matter of bias, and it's all as a matter of convenience and expediency and convention and ease of sociological comfort. Like I might see something where I feel like I'm better equipped to communicate with this person than this other person. Sure. Because I feel like I might have more in common with this person.
Well, and that's kind of a different thing, I think. Like if, let's say, if there's a language barrier, and I know, because this happens, I work at the library, so this happens often, like someone will come up and to the desk when I'm working and they speak only Spanish. Yeah. My Spanish is terrible. I can't speak Spanish to save my life. Yeah. So I would go and get somebody who, if there's somebody around who does speak Spanish. Yeah. Right? So I mean, that's practical. That makes sense. Like I have a language barrier here. I am unable to communicate with this person across the desk from me. Yeah. So I need to bring in somebody who can translate. Yeah. Right. So I mean that makes more sense. I don't really see that as I see that as privilege in a good way. I would say like, well, this person that can speak English and Spanish, my coworker, that's a good privilege for them to have. That's a good skill, I would say. That's because they're able to communicate two separate directions, and that's pretty awesome.
No, that is
or
awesome.
people that are like multilingual and can speak like 10 languages. Like, man, that's the coolest thing ever.
Well, and I think that those are sort of the people that are going to have success within society.
Yes, for sure.
Is the more people you're able to connect with, the more people that you're able to communicate with as peers and on their level, then the greater likelihood of success that you'll have, and the more power that you'll have within that community as somebody who has strong relationships. And I think that's the one thing that should encourage all of us to to learn another language and to be as I mean, we're living in a world where and not just speak another language, but metaphorically to speak other people's languages, and it doesn't have to, and it could be nonverbal language. It could be I think empathy is a way of speaking.
Like I get
language.
you. Right? Like I understand you. I've been through some of the same. That goes back to what I was saying about you speaking to people that are in the prison system. They will respect you more than me because you've been there, done that. They would look at me like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. What do you read a book on it or something? Like, what do you like? You know what I mean? Like they look at you and go, no, this guy, there's empathy there. He gets it. He's been in. He's done the time. He's dealt with this stuff on a personal level. So that's important too.
That is important, and I think that and I think that back to this idea of access and what we'll call privilege, and regardless of race. Right now, there's a lot of people in positions of power who are white and historically have been white and been responsible for the development of things within the country.
Sure.
But at the same time, they might look to me as and this is something that I've experienced on two different levels. Because I have been an inmate, and I have been I have been shown privilege in society, but I've also been denied privilege and been ostracized as somebody like who because I messed up so bad in my life.
Well, there's a whole group of people that would look at you as someone who spent over 20 years in jail and look at you as a lower form of life.
Yeah.
Right. They would see you as somebody who's not, you're not as good as me. I've never been to prison. You know what I'm saying? There's that hierarchy that happens.
And that happens within the within communities too.
Right. Sure.
Within the so in terms of the hierarchy of white men, I'm pretty low down on that.
Sure.
Because I've sociologically I've contributed very little.
Right.
And there was and I failed to meet expectations. And so that's the thing is there's I think that right now and this would be the if we find ourselves in a place and time where where there's more and more an increasing number of people of color in positions, in powerful positions or in potentially efficacious roles, like roles where they could, make decisions that have impact and they're invested and trusted to do a job and they're doing it well. And, my belief is, and I think that over time you'll see that the selection process for for their successors and for their allies and for people that are given opportunity and employment will purport, will change along with that, like, and I think that there's a type of, kind of tribalism that exists within society where people identify with their, with their own to a large extent.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think that that's the kind of thing that happens. And like you said, it probably shouldn't. Like,
right.
in a society that values and cherishes, diversity and equality and inclusion. Like, everybody should be evaluated on their merits.
Yes.
But at the same time, the selection process is highly, biased. Because it's made by human beings. Maybe we have AI select the people that are going to be in those positions. Like, but who programs the AI? Like, that's the thing.
Some rich white guy, probably.
Some rich white guys programming all these machines. Like, it's one of those things where you want to try to be fair, and you want to try to create a better society, and you want to have everybody feel like they have an equal and legitimate stake in society.
Right.
And I think that's the key to getting everybody on the same page, is they have to feel like it's fair and that it's not rigged, and that, hey, if I work hard and I try to succeed at this, I'm going to be given an opportunity to advance and to better myself.
Sure.
And right now, I mean, a lot of, and over over time, I mean, probably throughout history, there's been people that don't feel like the system is set up in a way that ensures that it's equitable and fair for everybody.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, and granted, that's not a very that's not that's not any kind of like a divergent point of view or any kind of light bulb statement. Like, that's an obvious thing that people want and believe generally, but but that's kind of where I'm
for sure
I'm at, and I'm just trying to like find my way in the world. And you mentioned spirituality. A lot of what I'm doing now and how I'm trying to perceive the world is like, I'm trying in a lot of ways, I'm trying to get outside of that that kind of worldly mindset, and this kind of like maybe think about everybody as a spiritual being, and not as a material being, there's duality of man. We have a body and we have a spirit.
That's right.
And and this needs to be cared for, and there's all kinds of concerns about the body. But really, I think
only one of them lives forever, though.
I think so, and I think that's the one that I'm more interested in now, in communicating to and helping along, and I feel like that's like, in terms of what I can contribute and the investment that I'm going to make, and also just the way that I feel like the choices that I make are ones that I can trust and that I can feel proud of, are because I can rationalize a lot of things, and I could try to break I could break down like some of the in a logical way and in a academic way, like what my choices should be and how I should make them, and the truth of the matter is I think that in the past I've talked myself into some pretty bad decisions.
Sure.
And all of the best decisions that I've made have been ones that I've made in the spirit. When I've trusted God to do that thing, like, because I live kind of by this right now. It's like in Proverbs 3:5. I'll trust in the Lord with all my heart, and I'll lean not on my own understanding, but in all, in everything I do, in all the ways that I live and exist in this world, I'll trust in Him, and He'll
That's
direct
the
me.
only beneficial way to live, really.
Well, and I think that's true, and also I think that's practical for me,
Right.
because of the way that I've lied to myself in the past, and the way that I've rationalized decisions that I've made, and also the fact that I've thought that I was so smart about one thing or another, and then years later realized I have a whole different point of view.
Yeah.
That I'm evolving, that I'm changing over time.
Of course.
But with the Spirit of God is the same yesterday and today and forever.
And that's something that I wanted to ask you about too, in kind of the last, however long we have here, 15 minutes or so. You talked about, you've already kind of given your testimony like over the whole course of this for the most part.
Yeah.
But you had talked about when you were younger going to the youth group and kind of feeling accepted there, and then coming out of that. But you sound like you've always had a belief in God through all of that, even when you were doing the wrong things, committing crimes, going to jail, all this kind of stuff. So at what point do you feel that you became a Christian, literally? Do you think that happened in youth group when you were a kid and then you just kind of went your own way for a while and then you came back to that? Or do you feel like it was more later on in life where you had an actual real experience with indwelling of the Holy Spirit?
I think that when I was a kid, when I was in that youth group, I think that I feel like and who knows if it happened before then, but I felt a strong presence of God in my life during those times in that youth group. And I did feel like the Holy Spirit, His Holy Spirit lived within me, at that time, and whether He was with me before then or not, I don't know. I think that my awareness, though, that my recognition, that my confession of faith, that the moment that I said, that I believed in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and that His Holy Spirit would indwell within me and help guide and protect me throughout my life. I feel like that was true throughout my life, even when and people say hey, well, if you're invested with the Holy Spirit and He's living within you, and you're continuing to sin, and you're continuing to make these decisions that are contrary to the nature of that Spirit, did you have a true conversion experience?
That's a good question.
And so, and that's a theological, question and argument that I don't have an answer to, because I felt like, despite my decisions and despite the fact that that I had kind of gotten away from my faith, I did feel a kind of a thread of connection.
Yeah.
And when I would hear somebody listening to Christian music on the tier in prison, I would remember some of those lyrics, and they'd resonate with my spirit.
Yeah.
And then when I'd hear people having conversations, whether in English or Spanish, about the things that God's doing in their life, I would go, oh man, I know God's capable of doing stuff in my life too, and I experienced it back then, and I know I could experience it now.
Yeah.
But I'm I don't feel, for whatever reason, I wasn't exercising that faith, at that time.
I would say that
away from it.
What you just described is exactly what the Bible describes as a person who's saved. It's because it doesn't mean once you get saved that now you no longer sin.
Yeah.
It means that now when you do sin, the conviction is there.
Yeah.
The relationship with the Lord is still there. It's like Paul talks about in Romans 7.
Yeah.
He's struggling. There's a struggle there now because the Holy Spirit is living in you, but you still are living in your flesh.
Yeah, you're convicted and conflict.
Yeah, so there's this battle going on now. Your flesh says, oh, I want that. The temptation comes in and your flesh says, ooh, that looks good.
Yeah.
And then the Spirit goes, nah. And then sometimes we still make the decision to say, oh, today I'm going to give in to my flesh.
Yeah.
And then the Spirit convicts you for that to where maybe before you were saved, you didn't have that.
Well, and I think that's paramount. I think that's key. Because, and I feel that a lot now in my life, and the thing is I'm attending to that more. Like I hear that, granted, it was there and present throughout my life, and the voice was small, and it was and it's because I had if you want to use the metaphor, I had the stuff in my ears. But now I'm pulling it out, and I'm becoming more and more attentive to the voice of God and the voice of the Holy Spirit is guiding me in life, and to make good decisions and to make godly decisions, or decisions aligned with the will of God. And sometimes it's simple things. There's oftentimes throughout the day, and this is really where my spirituality, I think, might depart from other people's, and maybe it makes me more in common with other Christians too, but there's things that you feel are the right thing to do, and for me, if there is a definition for sin, and it's knowing the right thing to do in a given situation, and then deciding not to do it for whatever reason, because I don't have the resources for it, I don't have the time for it, I don't feel like doing it right now because it's difficult. Maybe scary, and it could be things. It's the smallest stuff. For me too. Sometimes it's like the decision I make to whether to litter or not. Even
sure.
Like I know it's not the right. Like why are you going to throw this thing?
But isn't that funny though? Because before you were saved, you probably could care less about that.
Yeah, walk by a piece of trash. Like why are you going to walk by that piece of trash? Just pick it up. You know it's the right thing to do. Pick it up.
Yes.
You see somebody that needs some help.
Yep.
Help that person. You can walk right past the person.
Right.
And then, but the thing is, it's like how much, it really does become very complicated. Because how much of my life and time do I devote to doing the things? Because as you hear more and more and more and more, become more and more attentive. It's difficult to walk, in faith and to do everything that you feel Jesus will have you do in that moment. And so you almost have to give up your whole life. That's the thing is it depending on how deep off you go into it, and this is your whole life becomes an emulation of Christ, and then and you have to put aside this flesh altogether. But I do have faith because I've been through a lot of things, and I have moderated my commitment level in faith over time. I'm accepting the reality that just do what you can right now. With the resources that you have. God knows where you're coming from.
Yes.
God knows what you're capable of, and you're making this decision right now, and good for you for doing that. But and if you decide at a different time that you're incapable of doing it, and you feel conflicted about that, then pray about it and align yourself with the Lord about that, because He knows your heart, and He knows what you're capable of, and there's certainly an understanding of every aspect of your life and where you're at, and I think that's the kind of honesty and transparency that I'm coming to have with myself now, and with Kelly as well, and we're walking in faith together,
nice.
But we're also very realistic about who we are and where we've come from, and the challenges that we face. She's been sober for 8 years. I've been sober for over 5.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And well, gosh, it's longer than that now. So I got sober in 2018. So May 18th of 2018.
Okay.
And
That's my son's birthday. May
is that
18th.
right?
May 18th. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My youngest son.
Yeah, and so May 18th of 2018. So you know, I got married in 2017. I wasn't sober that time. You know,
Right.
but that's how it worked. You know, over
Sure.
time.
Sure.
You know, my behavior. You know, like I wrestled with that. You know, developmentally, and until I was finally able to shake it. And it was, you know, it was less than a year, but it was over 9 months or so where I just, you know, I kept trying and kept trying and kept trying. And I feel like that's what I'm doing in my spiritual walk right now. Is I just keep trying to, you know, to align myself with the will of God and to do what is, you know, is expected of me.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
and to be the kind of partner to God that I, you know, that I, you know, I was trying to be a certain partner to Kelly to meet the expectations that she had for a relationship, and to respect, you know, the commitment that she's made. And in a lot of ways, you know, I'm doing the same thing with God. That there's an expectation, you know, that I'm gonna do this, you know, this thing. I'm gonna live this life. I'm gonna walk through this, you know, this earthly veil in a way that would be, you know, that would kind of meet the expectations and the commitment, you know, that he would have me, you know, give, and that I wouldn't disrespect the what, you know, everything he's done for me, you know, like, and that's the thing is right now I do feel like it's a level of respect and honor, you know, like I want, you know, like, hey man, I've given this whole new life. I got this opportunity now. I lived through some pretty crazy stuff, but I've got my bearings, and I got a strong relationship with the Lord, and I could, and before where the living like I'm doing now, grinding that out, just working a 9-to-5 job, and you know, doing all my chores and being faithful to, you know, to one woman and not drinking and not using drugs. All of that would have seemed like a
pipe dream.
Well, and not just that, but maybe like a life that I wouldn't want to live, like some kind of like a burden, you know, like that was kind of what I was afraid of when I got away from home. When, you know, because I saw my dad's life, you know, and my dad's a pretty upstanding guy. He's not a spiritual guy. He's not a religious guy, but he has integrity and morally he's a decent dude. Sure. But, and you know, he's got a work ethic, and he's been grinding it out for years, and he's kind of still doing that in his seniority. He's grinding it out because he's living his life now. His you know, his wife's passed, and he's still trying to be, you know, a good dude. You know, like and so anyways. But I saw that, and I was just like, yeah, I don't want that. I can't live that kind of life, you know. But now that I'm in this different place, I'm seeing it, and I'm going, you know what? This is life. This is what it's about, and it's not about all of this stuff that you're doing. It's about, like, you know, like, doing that. But it doesn't really matter what you're doing, you know, as long as you're, you know, as you're doing it, you know, with this mindset, this, you know, faithfulness, and you know, I'm not, you know, like, not that it doesn't matter what you're doing, like it doesn't matter if you're living in sin or not, or if you're, you know, like you're working to, you know, to achieve some end, but just the fact that, you know, I could be working as in a warehouse, or I could be working as a drug and alcohol counselor, or I could be, you know, a college professor, or I could be one of these, you know, people in power, you know, like,
who knows, right?
You know, like the thing is that none of it really matters, you know, as much as the way that you, you know, approach it, and how you're, you know, conduct yourself and carry it out, you know, because there's honor and there's value in anything that a person does if they're doing it, you know, in, you know, with that, with the right mind.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Yeah, and with that spiritual focus and wanting to do what the Lord wants you to do, to be seeking Him daily. I mean, that's the Christian walk.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're going to walk in perfection. It doesn't mean you're not going to fall down. You're not going to go, you know what I mean? Like, we'll make bad decisions. But the hope is that we are seeking Him in all things, right?
Yeah. Seek first the kingdom of God.
Right.
And that's I recognize that. And I feel like that's the thing that's the way you transcend this world too.
Yep.
You know, we're in this world, but we're not of it. And whatever sojourn, activities you do, like it's all about, that ascendancy and that closer walk with the Lord.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And until you're not doing any of this anymore.
Yeah.
And
spot on, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. It's good stuff, man. Good getting to know you. Thanks for sharing your story with me.
It's great to get to know you too, and thank you for inviting me over.
Yeah. Thanks again for checking out this podcast, and please tell all of your friends about it. Don't let those shadow banning savages win the battle. Also, I would love to hear your feedback. You can contact me at whycan'twetalkaboutThat at proton.me. Make sure that you subscribe so that you'll be notified whenever new episodes are released. Thanks.